That clock's awfully slow.
It is.
Good evening and welcome as we reconvene our December meeting of the Planning Commission. So you know we met Monday night to speak about the comp plan. We have a pretty full schedule for the evening, but before that, it is actually my pleasure to recognize our outgoing and longest serving currently Planning Commissioner, Patrick Kelly, for his long service here. And
You're standing.
I'm going to stand and you're going to
Okay.
stand.
Okay.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
It's been fabulous to work under your leadership. You were actually chair when I started. And we will miss your institutional memory and just the perspective that you bring. But we're very pleased that you're going on to keep serving your community as the county commissioner.
Thank you.
And as that we have a token of our appreciation.
Oh, maps.
Yeah. That has been signed by planning staff and your fellow planning commissioners at the place where they reside.
Oh, that's awesome.
So this is the
That's
geologic
great.
map of Douglas County, Kansas, that you will always keep in mind. And if
Excellent.
you have any
Thank you.
questions about it,
Who's down here?
please. There's nobody down here. That might
okay.
be something worth noting.
Okay, good. Interesting.
Commissioner, that was an ink blot mistake that turned into my I-winds off map.
All right, excellent. Good to know. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Now we go back to our regular business with our communications, and we will receive any written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners. Do we have any?
No.
Disclosure of ex parte communications. Do we have anyone who needs to, has had any conversations about agenda items that you'd like to share? Commissioner Sands.
I had a conversation with Mr. Ted Boyle out of North Lawrence and just got some general background information on the project, and he shared with me some information about pumps and some pumping requirements that hopefully, I see him out here, hopefully he'll probably share that information with us, and if not, I'll make sure that because he's got far more specific information than I do.
And that's according to item 2, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any other ex parte communications? Okay, any declarations of abstentions from specific agenda items by commissioners?
Yes.
All right.
So I'm going to abstain from item 5. Not the property owner, but one of the business owners of that project is somebody I directly supervise. I'm going to abstain from item 6. Item 6, once it leaves here, will go to the county commission. There's only 3 of us there. There's 10 of you here. So I'm going to let you guys figure that out and send it my way. And then item 7 will be owned by the county. So I'm going to abstain from that one as being a county commissioner starting in January.
You're not trying to get out of this meeting early, are you?
We still have 2, A, B, C, 3, 4. No.
All right. We also, at this point, have a time where we allow general public comment. If you came to speak on a specific agenda item, we'll have time for that, but this is a time when we open the mics there to anyone who'd like to address the commission on any non-agenda item for 3 minutes. Is anyone interested in making a general public comment? Okay, seeing none, I actually was going to suggest moving a few of our agenda items around, but I want to check first and see, maybe we could have a show of hands for who came for which items. North Lawrence item number 2, we're going to cover first anyway. Is anyone here on item number 7? That's the group home in the Pinckney neighborhood. Okay. I would like to propose that we move items 6 and 7 a little earlier in the agenda, between items 3 and 4. And then you won't have to sit through our text amendment discussion. So our order then will be items 2, A, B, and C, 3, 6, and 7, and then 4 and 5. Do I need any procedure to make that happen, Scott?
No,
Okay.
I think you're fine.
So with that, we will start with item 2. And we'll hear from Sandy.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sandy Day, Planner. The project that you have before you this evening for item number 2 has a number of parts to it, so this presentation is combined. We'll start out covering a little bit about the zoning and then move into the development plan portion of the development request. To start with the zoning, the property is located north of the river in the what is generally referred to as the North Lawrence neighborhood. We'll talk about that in a moment. The property includes multiple zoning and multiple property owners. The development project includes rezoning. There will be a preliminary plat that comes forward to you. It has been deferred. And then a phased development with the preliminary development plan. The request is for CD zoning with a PD overlay. So the CD zoning would be the base district, and the PD overlay would be what is controlling the density, the height, the bulk, and the building elevations for the project. This exhibit highlights where the different ownerships are located within the project. You have both public and private entities. You have quite a bit of public right-of-way that ultimately would be vacated with the project, and the property assembled into a single lot. The CS zoning is located here at the intersection of North 2nd and Locust Street. It is developed with a number of commercial uses. The OS zoning generally falls along the river, and the balance of the property is zoned IG. There are the related applications that I've mentioned, but there is also a comprehensive plan amendment which the Planning Commission considered a number of years ago, forwarded to the City Commission, but essentially with a failure to recommend. City Commission approved that comprehensive plan amendment, but it has not been published because the zoning and the platting that were associated with that project have kind of been on hold. So this zoning application replaces the zoning work that we looked at a number of years ago. The preliminary plat that will be on a future agenda will also replace the plat that we looked at a number of years ago. The project at the time did not have a developed plan to go with it. The plan that was proposed was conceptual in nature, and at this time the applicant has a more firm idea of what that development is, although not fully developed. It is part of the preliminary development plan. There would be additional phases that would come forward with this project as final development plans that would completely identify what those specific uses are within the project. At this time, the uses are really outlined in broad categories. The existing land use for the property, we've talked about some of the surrounding land uses, both within the project and within nearby proximity, are vacant. We have a number of commercial properties and uses located up and down North 2nd Street. There is residential use that is located further into the neighborhood to the east of North 2nd Street. There are some warehouse uses that are identified. These are more commonly storage uses. The public institutional land use is the depot. The surface parking lot is actually categorized as a parks open space, but it is a surface parking lot that supports the station and the park property further to the south. The property itself is not within the boundaries of North Lawrence, but it is commonly known as part of the North Lawrence neighborhood, and so we did review it in that context. It has some unique factors or contributing elements to this property that both define it and contain it. That is the location of North 2nd Street, the railroad, and the river. The low-density residential uses that we see in this neighborhood are low density, and they are typically located within the heart of that neighborhood. Some of the suitability factors for this project that given the context of what the proposed redevelopment is and the ability to redevelop the property efficiently and effectively, the existing zonings really are no longer appropriate. Given the fact that we are looking at using the Land Development Code, the CD district is probably the most equalizing base district that we could have for this area that allows and accommodates a mix of uses. The PD overlay then provides the structure and framework for how that particular development will occur. The CD district permits a range of uses. There is at least one use that we identified that would be nonconforming, and that is the Gaslight Bar. That is not necessarily unusual to see some existing uses become nonconforming when property is rezoned. The zoning history is outlined in your staff report. The area was predominantly industrial historically, with small land uses being encroached into that area, notably the commercial node that's kind of located right at that intersection. The open space zoning was something that was added to that area in 2006 with the adoption of the current Land Development Code. The property is somewhat isolated. It is lacking in access at this time. The applicant is exploring a second access, and in order to move forward with some of those phases in the development, a second access would be required. So there is some amount of development that is restricted until that second access can be provided. North 2nd Street is a gateway, and so having an appropriate appearance of buildings along North 2nd Street is something that is important to the project. The CD district certainly does organize buildings and land uses close to streets with a high pedestrian walkability element to it. This project is also within the environs of a historic project, so the details of how that project is going to be managed is subject to historic resources review. The applicant is currently engaged in that process. The PD overlay replaces a condition that was part of the original zoning, which was that the applicant submit for review and approval a set of design guidelines. As we moved through the project and talking with the applicant over a period of time, we concluded that the PD overlay may be the more efficient tool to be able to establish the specific design elements that are applicable to this project, given its location and its proximity to the historic structure and uses in that proximity. So the PD overlay will replace that condition. So that is where we ended with the zoning. Related to the zoning, there is that CPA amendment that we are asking you to reaffirm with this project. That's just really to kind of close the loop. The preliminary plat, we have given you a little bit of information about, and this is really just to put it into context that you see the number of parcels in the existing right-of-way that ultimately would be vacated with the project, the creation of a single lot, and a number of interior easements that would provide access and services for utilities that would serve this property. That will be an item that comes forward to you. It has been deferred at this time to allow staff and the applicant to have some discussion about how and when the public pieces of land are transferred to the applicant. There is a separate agreement that the applicant has with the city about how and when that works that we continue to work through. Brings us to the development plan. So the development plan is a multi-phase project. We've tried to spell out what those phases are. Phase 1 will include those buildings that are predominantly at the intersection, Johnny's, the Gaslight Tavern, Third Eye Susan, which is a retail mixed-use building, and then an additional building located along North 2nd Street in this area. Phase 2 through 4 are the buildings that are located and align the riverfront space and start to frame and develop what that public space will look like. It includes multi-story buildings and mixed-use buildings as well. The later phases of the project, specifically Phase 5, is currently identified as a hotel. There is the possibility that that use could change in the future. And then the applicant has identified what's referred to as future phases, and that includes buildings 9, 10, and 11, and they are presumably to be mixed-use buildings, although the percentage and scope of what that mixed use will be has not been identified, and that really has resulted in some conditions that staff has identified. Rather than presenting all of the conditions at the end, the condition related to phasing, condition number B at the end of the staff report, really gets at the idea that we really need to revisit the preliminary development plan when there is more information about that future concept phase, and that is a phase that we are going to have to be looking at that second access and timing with it. So that's a reflection in a condition. Some of the land use pieces at this point, land use and parking, are elements that are tied together in the staff report and part of this part of the presentation. We have residential uses and non-residential uses. In the CD district, off-street parking is not required. In this particular project, we have long talked with the applicant that parking does need to be provided at some level with this project. Within the analysis of the parking and the uses, we have given you a calculation of what parking would be required at just a straight zoning, not CD, where there's that exemption. And we've also provided a summary of what parking would be required for residential development. Multifamily development requires 1 parking space per bedroom plus 1 parking space for every 10 units. At this point, the uses are very generalized. We have eating and drinking, office, and retail. Within those categories, as we look at parking, that eating and drinking use can have a different range of parking depending on the specification or subcategory of what it is. Same thing for retail. So we've made some assumptions as we've looked at this project to be able to look at it holistically. And that kind of brings us back to the idea that we are going to have to look at parking again in more detail with the submission of a final development plan to make sure that the parking is balancing with the proposed land uses. This is a summary that staff prepared for the off-street parking. This would be straight parking with straight commercial zoning. And it has a substantial amount of parking that would be required for the overall development. The applicant has proposed to use shared parking, and shared parking in a true mixed-use development that includes residential, office, commercial uses really is an effective way to be able to do that. The trick with shared parking is to make sure that you are starting with a good base number, and as we talked with the applicant as we were preparing the final pieces of the staff report and the presentation, we did discover that we're off between the applicant's numbers and staff's numbers of what that starting number is. So that does have some impact on the parking, and that also led us to the idea that we need to revisit parking. Staff's conclusion is that shared parking is an appropriate tool to use for this project. We need to make sure that we're at a good starting point. The applicant has enough area in the future phases to be able to accommodate additional parking if that's what the conclusion is for that final development plan as each of those phases move forward. The reason I have garage parkings there with an X is because I was unsure of exactly how many garage spaces we would end up with. Many times we see garage parking where it's spec'd out as one thing, but as we look at the final details with building permits, the applicant can't necessarily always achieve that number of spaces. Again, the buildings are intended to be mixed use. There will be some amount of garage parking associated with this project as well as surface parking for the development. We are confident that there is enough area of land to be able to meet parking for this project. That resulted in one of the conditions in the recommendation. The property is subject to some floodplain review. It is subject to some review by Corps of Engineers because of its proximity to the levee. So there will be additional review that comes with that. The local floodplain development permit is administrative. Just made note of that. The design guidelines we've talked about that are being replaced by the plan development, the elevations, the building setback, and the building height will be elements that are ultimately defined by the Historic Resources Commission. So we've also recommended that the determination of the historic resources action be a part of this project approval. There is a requirement in the Land Development Code that limits the maximum footprint of a building to 25,000 square feet. There are 2 buildings in the identified phases that do somewhat exceed that, and we've made the applicant aware of that. The footprint of buildings 10 and 11 may also exceed that. It's hard to tell at this point in time. We're just making some estimates about what it is, but we want to make clear that that is a current requirement of the CD district. And that resulted in conditions D and E of this project. So staff's recommendation on the preliminary development plan is for approval with a number of conditions. That is really to set those final parameters for this project to be able to allow both the applicant and staff to move forward with knowledge of what those expectations are for the projects. The actions that you have this evening and the votes that we need you to consider are a vote to affirm, reaffirm, or approve the CPA and the related Planning Commission resolution. To, if you so choose, we're recommending that you approve or forward a recommendation for approval of the zoning, and also to forward a recommendation for approval of the preliminary development plan. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know the applicant is here as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure we will.
If I can find the right one. Good evening, Paul Warner with Paul Warner Architects. It's great to be able to stand before you and present this project. It's been a long time coming. The developers think now's the right time to be moving forward, so we're very excited about it. There's a lot to cover tonight. We'll start with an overall vision of the project. Sandy did a great job on covering a lot of this, but so we're hoping to show you some of the pretty pictures. There's 3 items before you, as Sandy mentioned: the rezoning, a preliminary plat, and then the development plan. So we'll spend most of the time talking about the development plan. As the zoning request, we believe the PD is the right option. Makes a lot more transparent. Everybody gets to see the buildings. It's helps as we move forward that people see what they're going to get. We're in agreement with the staff report, subject to a couple minor little tweaks that we'll talk about. So I can show you some of the cool drawings now. So building 1 is Johnny's that Rick's here. He's owned Johnny's forever. Johnny's going to get a little facelift, so we're pretty excited about that. Building 2 is Gaslight. Building 3 is the Witch Building. We can't come up with a better name yet. So we want to do a little addition on it, which will help defer the cost to repair that building. And then building 4 would be going north of Johnny's along North 2nd Street. We call that kind of our phase 1. We like to call phase 1B or phase 2 building 5, which would be the first building up along the river. And then we'd like to continue north with building 6 and 7. And that's what we're kind of committed to as a progression. So the overall site plan, which we'll show again here shortly as well, just for reference, is to really get the idea that we still think we're going to get a hotel. We're just not sure what site they may want, and hopefully a few more buildings. But we wanted to get that out in the open so everybody could see that the ultimate goal is to develop most of the site. Might as well cover parking. There's probably nobody more motivated to make sure we get the parking right than we are and the owners of the project. I think the key is exactly what Sandy mentioned several times, that it's all about the shared parking numbers, and that we use the right percentage, and we use the right tables, and that really is the benefit of a true mixed-use project. Office users, residential users hopefully go to work during the day, and it really is about mixing up the right number and that right percentage of cars at different times. So I hope we don't have to talk about too many spreadsheets tonight, but we like the condition that we just have to get an agreement on what those numbers are and what the right number is for parking. To wear you out a little bit on numbers while we're talking about as well, it is, I'll use the word confusing, or it makes both of Sandy and mine life a little bit difficult in that, for instance, square footage of a restaurant, I have to show the square footage in the building plan for the building permit and the development plan. That happens to be the same number our traffic engineer uses when he's figuring the trips. But the parking's based on the customer area, which is a different number. So different restaurants are more efficient than others. So it is really about, as we move forward with different phases, looking at what's in phase 4, what are phase 1, building 4, building 5, building 6, and knowing those mixes and looking at those as we develop more buildings. But as Sandy mentioned again, we have plenty of land, so we feel really comfortable about the ability to deal with parking if that were to become a problem. So let's look at overall. So again, we feel, back to the concept, downtown is the most important part of Lawrence and the community. The more people we can get downtown, this is right across the river, is better for everybody. Certainly has been mentioned several times, the river's just an underutilized asset to the city. The levee, the ability to build a boardwalk or something for the general public just seems like an incredible opportunity. So let's show you a little bit more. This diagram shows what as Sandy mentioned, the Union Pacific Depot is listed as a local historic structure. There's a 250-foot environs circle. This shows that it's buildings 1, 2, 3, and 4 that are affected by those environs. So in our mind, this is one point we would like to tweak the condition about the HRC approvals, that the HRC and ARC approvals would apply to these 4 buildings and not to the entire development. We have been to the HRC. Like to say they were very excited about the project. They had really no comments on anything else other than the buildings that were within the 250 feet of the depot. To give you an idea what we're up against, this is the preliminary plat. It's about the busiest plat I think you'll ever see. Half the property is in the river. There's utilities everywhere. It's just a mess to deal with. So we were working with staff on cleaning this up and trying to get the lot lines to coincide a little bit more with the phasing as we've discussed. We mentioned that we get to deal with the Army Corps of Engineers, since none of you guys have ever seen this probably. This is a plat to deal with the Corps about how to define our west property line and where the levee was. So this drawing took about 18 months to get approved through the Corps. So nothing happens fast, but that's okay. So just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. Hopefully, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the site, but we thought we'd show a few pictures of what's there today. So this is a drawing of the utilities. The purple, for the most part, is all the overhead lines that get to be removed, so we're very excited about that, and all the new lines will be buried. The big purple dot in the middle is the one transmission line that we get to, we want to put a new monopole there. So just so you know, a transmission pole's about $375,000 for one pole, so try not to move many transmission lines. The rest of the purple's great. That's distribution lines, and Westar's very helpful on providing power to all our buildings. The fiber optic line has to be moved, the water line has to be looped, the gas lines all have to be moved, and the sanitary sewer line has to be replaced. This is our fire exhibit to show you all the different access points and how the fire trucks can get around to all sides of the buildings. So I'll correct one thing that Sandy said a couple times. In our minds, we have 2 access points now. So the lighted intersection at Second and Locust, and then you can see on the far left side of the screen is it's a right out, but it's also an emergency access point for the fire and rescue to get into the site if they need to. So we like to refer to this as we have 2 access points, and to their point that if more buildings are needed and we get to go further north, that we need a 3rd access point off of another street. These are the buildings that we have applied for demolition permits and have gone through the HRC with. The most popular one is the grain elevator in the middle. We have shown it on the development plan if you looked at it. We're hoping to keep it. We're working on ways to repurpose it. But at this point, it was 3 months ago that we did show it as being demolished, or at least the potential to be demolished, that we didn't want to come back and start. But our hope is to repurpose the building and kind of work around it, which is what the development plan shows. There it is. So we're working on ideas, and our point is there's so much going on with the site and the utilities, we just didn't want to commit to that for 100% yet until we see what we can do, but we are working to keep it. These are the other buildings that would be demolished. And then there's Johnny's. That's existing. So we're looking at knocking off the Betty's side, which was built in the 80s, renovating the structure, and getting everybody new bathrooms and a new patio out on the west side. Gaslight would stay the way it is. And then existing the Witch building. So we were looking at infilling the entire first floor and then going up above it. And currently we're showing 3 stories of studio apartments above it. So building 4, this is going north of Johnny's, would have 1 level of underground parking, and at grade level of parking and some minor commercial uses. We see some uses going here, but we think once we try to develop the river, everybody's going to be excited about being up on the river as opposed to building in building 4. And then we have 4 level of apartments on top of that. And that gives you a view from the east side. In the west. Building 5, this would be heading up along the river. It does have what we call an at-grade level of parking. So all of these buildings from now on, we're trying to do underground parking. One, it keeps less surface parking, which is a lot more enjoyable for everybody. And we're using the parking to make up the grade. If you've been there, you see how high the levee is compared to where the grade is. So our goal is to use those parking levels to help elevate everybody. So when you're in what really most people would perceive as the first floor of that building, you are already above the levee up on that elevation. So this building has 1 level of parking, and then we see retail, restaurant, and office, and then 3 levels of apartments, or start thinking about condominiums. This view shows how we're trying to use the elevation to get you up on the levee, so that when you're up on that main floor, you're really above where the path is now. So buildings 6 and 7, again, there's so much grade difference between the existing land and the levee that we can get 2 stories of parking prior to getting to the first floor of retail, and then several levels of apartments and or condos. And by that time, we'd be, 5 buildings into this and have a pretty good feel for what, how everything's being accepted by the city and what's renting and what our potential is to sell housing units. I think several of us involved in the project get attacked by people who want to know when they can buy something that close to downtown and have underground parking. This shows the change in grade and how we're, again, using that to get everybody up onto the levee. So I got a few renderings, so take them with a little grain of salt. But hopefully they'll also give you a feel for what we think is coming. The buildings in the back aren't really rendered. These are mostly done for the HRC, but the colored buildings are. So this shows Johnny's, Building 3, the Witch Building, and then the new Building 4. And this shows one of the buildings in the background. We didn't have it what's called modeling, but this will give you a feel for what we see the potential is. So this shows, again, buildings 1, 2, 3, and 4, we call first phase, second phase, third phase, fourth phase, and then an ultimate build-out plan. The gray area on the east side would be, if all this worked as good as we're hoping, we see a parking garage attached to one of those buildings to, again, trying to keep the surface parking as little as we can so we have more open space and more public space and some really cool things going on. So we see this as being on the boardwalk, for lack of a better word. I'd have more trees up there. The Corps of Engineers really doesn't like trees on their levee. So we can plant them in big planters, but we see more sunshades and stuff and trellises and things like that. But yet they don't like trees the roots go through the levee. But that gives you a feel for what we see as the potential up on the river. We had rowers out there on the river and stuff if you look close, so it's pretty cool. So, if I can. Where's it? That? Right. That's not it.
Somebody might have closed it.
You do it. We'll be right with you. Sandy, don't look.
Supposed to be the motorcycle view.
I don't want to make everybody dizzy, but we think that gives you a really cool feel of what we think North Second could be and the entrance into the site and, a gateway in North Lawrence. And we're just really excited about getting something going here. We'll get you back to something funner to look at. So it's a lot of stuff. Happy to answer any questions or listen to the public and then come back to anything you'd like.
Thank you. I'm sure we will have many questions.
I want to get you to something fun to look at, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I was somewhat remiss and I haven't explained our process. So we always hear from staff about an item first, then we give the applicant a chance to give his or her presentation, and then we open it up for public comment. Anyone who would like to speak will have 3 minutes, and we will have a clock going. to address the issues for that item. And then we give the applicant a chance to speak then after that to address maybe some of the concerns of the public. After that, we close all of the public comment session, and then we bring that up to the Planning Commission, though we reserve the right to ask questions of either the public if we need clarification, or if you've asked us a question, that may be the time when we address it, and also of staff and the applicant. So with that, do we have anyone who would like to speak on this item?
Point of order, please. Will there be public comment in the development plan section?
I believe we're handling all three items so A, B, 2A, 2B, and 2C together.
2B is actually a deferred item for you this evening.
That's the plat.
Okay,
So it's the rezoning and the development plan,
okay.
essentially.
So we have just those two items. We have the rezoning and the preliminary development plan. Those are the two items that are before us.
3 minutes?
3 minutes for each person. Would you like to speak first here?
So, Madam Chair, if I may, in the past with multiple items to speak to, we have entertained upping the time period to like 5 minutes so that they could cover both items.
Okay, that's fair.
I think that's where, Michael, you were going with it, right?
Who would like to start?
Is this public comment on the zoning part of it, is that what you're saying?
You can address the rezoning or the preliminary development plan, either one, within your 5 minutes.
Well, I'll start it off, but I'm
Okay.
gonna be up there probably 3 or 4 more times.
And if you can state your
My
name and,
My name's Ted Boyle, President of North Lawrence Improvement, and I'd just like to say, I've been working with this developer on this project for 10, 12 years. And so I'd just like to get it out of the way that we think this is a positive project, that this will definitely help North Lawrence, bring a destination to North Lawrence, and also the tax dollar. And so that a lot more improvements can be done to North Lawrence. That being said, about a month ago, matter of fact, I think, well, a month and a half, it was our November meeting, October, November, and they came over to the Neighborhood Association and made a presentation, and it was pretty well unanimously received. There were some questions and concerns, and as always in North Lawrence, the number one concern is storm drainage. This is an area that is not in the floodplain. There's a very small sliver that is in the floodplain. But that water, all water in North Lawrence has to be pumped out. You know, we just got a $7 million pump about 3 years ago over on Maple for residential, and then there's the pump on North 2nd Street that got put in 95 after the 93 storm water flood. And right now, when the intersection was redone at 2nd and Locust here about, I don't know, it's 8 or 9 years ago, maybe 10, done with stimulus money, by the way, the storm drainage was redone to the underpass to eliminate the flooding there. Now, that being said, and you can check this with Matt Bond, the stormwater engineer, that the stormwater system in that area is at capacity. So they cannot use the city stormwater system. And also 10, 12 years ago, I brought this up when we were talking about this, and that they would have to have their own stormwater system. In other words, a pump. And as you see, the parking lots and the rooftops, and that being out of the floodplain, it's a downhill run to every place else. And now they talked about a gravity feed system to the river, and you know, what happens there is, if the river comes up, then the city shuts the gates off on the levee. And so the water cannot get out of North Lawrence into the river except if it has a pump. And there's only 2 of those. One at 6th and Walnut comes from the pump at 6th and Maple, the new one that we just had installed, and the one at 2nd and Locust. They're just on the other side of Red Ink Racing. And those are the pressurized pumps. Now there's one under the underpass that feeds out over the bridge on the east side of the bridge. And all the rest of them on the levee are gravity feed. So when the water comes up, and the river's been up enough this past summer that those gates had to be closed on the gravity feed. So that water ponds on the north side of the levee, and North Lawrence is protected by levee 360 degrees around. We live in a big bowl over there, flat bowl. So this water has to be pumped out. So that's the number one concern on this, is getting that water out of that area and not into the any of the residential areas, and not using the city infrastructure, because Matt Bond will tell you that it is at capacity now. And so that being said, that's the number one concern. The second concern was the building along there north of Johnny's, right on North 2nd Street. When we first talked about it, they were wanting to put 5 stories there, and the residents and the NLIA thought that that was a little too high, and especially on North 2nd, right there as you come out of the underpass and go under the underpass. The drawings on there of the road that they have going in there looks like it's flat, but it's not. You know, there's a good 25 feet from the roadbed to the first floor of the buildings that are there. So you put 5 stories on top of that, you got a skyscraper in North Lawrence. And but 4, you know, which they've got it cut down to now, is acceptable. And I had told them that if this project was any place else in North Lawrence, it wouldn't fly, because of the residential makeup of our neighborhood. And since it's back in there behind Johnny's and kind of an isolated area, we believe that this is a perfect site for this project. And but there are a few concerns on the development, as all developments do have. And the
Mr.
third
Boyle,
concern
Mr. Boyle, if we can keep an eye on the
is,
clock.
I'm sorry. Well, just to have the buildings on North 2nd Street look like the depot. Don't throw up something that looks like a 21st century metal building front facade. It has to look like the buildings. Now, the ones along the river, they don't have to look like that, so.
Thank you very much,
Thank you for your time,
Mr.
but I'll
Boyle.
be up here to finish it later on.
Who would like to be next? Do we have any other members of the public who'd like to speak on this item?
Hello, my name is Ron Renz. I've been a resident of this area for about 40 years. I run a number of businesses in Lawrence and North Lawrence. I run businesses at the airport. I bring people from all over the world to Lawrence. What a great development this is. This is going to be an awesome entrance to the city of Lawrence from people come. My people come in through the airport in Lawrence. This is the entrance to downtown Lawrence for my people. What an awesome development. I think it's awesome. The people that are doing this project are very responsible business people in this community. Rick Renfro, he's owned a number of businesses in Lawrence. He's always helped out Lawrence. He helps out the community. He's a responsible business owner. He's the kind of business owner we want to see succeed. Paul Warner, likewise, the architect on the project. They've done a lot of great development in this community. I have every confidence they're going to work with the neighborhood association. They're already doing that. They're talking that. This is going to be a really good project, and I think it's going to be well received by the community, and it should be well received by the city as well. We've got a problem in Lawrence right now. There's a lot of empty storefronts in Lawrence. Why is that? There's not enough people downtown. This is going to bring more people downtown. That's going to help the economy in this town significantly. We look at, there's a lot of development going on in town. Where's it going? It's going out west, it's going down south. It's taking people away from the core of the city. That's why the businesses in downtown Lawrence are empty. We need to keep bringing people to downtown Lawrence. This is going to do that. It's going to bring residents, it's going to bring business, it's going to be a gateway to the community that we should be proud of. If you haven't figured out, I'm in favor of this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, can you spell your name for me real quick?
Renz, R-E-N-Z.
Thank you, Mr. Renz.
Thank you.
Who else?
Hi, good evening, Chairwoman Wiley and Commissioners. My name is Michael Allman. I'm speaking for myself tonight. And by the way, I've chosen to be here as my fun opportunity rather than the Lawrence Neighborhood Association meeting. Yeah, this is how I get my grins. Pretty sad, isn't it? I have no particular objection to the project itself. My main concern is that it is being, and has been for a number of years, presented as an extension of or part of downtown, which I think is probably a good idea. But having the downtown zoning and the benefits of downtown zoning without providing some of the amenities of what really is downtown, I find is a problem. And particularly what I'm referring to is the circulation in a number of regards. And if it's not addressed in the development plan, then the zoning could be problematic. Specifically, I'm thinking that a lot of communities around the United States, and the rest of the world for that matter, have recognized that if we're truly going to achieve multimodal transportation in our cities, we have to lower the minimum parking requirement, as well as simultaneously providing the multimodal facilities, the bikeways, the transit, things of that sort, the better sidewalks. But part of the picture is to remove some of the parking requirements so that more people have incentive to walk and to bicycle. In the presentation this evening, I think I saw 2 or maybe 3 bicycles illustrated. No bikeways. They're in the street, which is not very good, and this community is moving away, according to our mayor, from having bicycles not separated from motor vehicles, or else the bicycles that were presented in the illustrations are on the sidewalk, and we're also moving away from that. So if this project is truly trying to be multimodal, we need bikeways integrated into it, and really, this whole thing should be run, and we should have the MPO staff here commenting on this whole thing. It's unfortunate that, I'm not sure what the protocols are for doing that, but if we consider that this has one entrance and it's a certain width of right-of-way, and we add bikeways, what's that going to do for the motor vehicle congestion? Even as it's drawn right now, the motor vehicle congestion at 2nd and Locust, I think is going to be horrendous, particularly if the project is successful, which I hope it will be. Having that narrow an area coming into North 2nd Street, when you consider that the speed limit north of Locust is 45 miles an hour. South of Locust on the bridge, I think it's 40. The traffic at that intersection is going to be crazy. They say that they've been talking to Union Pacific Railroad for 12 years, and they're supposed to negotiate their, quote, second access. I really wonder, are they going to be negotiating with Public Works? Because if you consider how an access under or over the Union Pacific Railroad at Lion Street, how are they going to do that? Is it going to go under? If it does, they're going to have to put another pump in to handle the water, just like they run the underneath under the railroad at 2nd Street. If they go over the railroad, which I think would be even more expensive. It's going to be very high elevation, bringing that down to North Second Street. How's that going to be configured? How much extra right-of-way is going to be needed? What's that going to do for the functioning and the appearance of that gateway? I'm really skeptical about how the second entrance is going to work. And if a lot of this is contingent on that second entrance, particularly the full build-out, there's a whole lot left unknown here, not only phase 2 and 3 and 4, but all these other elements. So I think it needs to be looked at a whole lot more thoroughly for circulation on all levels. Downtown is a walkable shopping district, 20 miles an hour. People can walk and bicycle there very readily. How is this going to connect a 40-mile-an-hour bridge? I mean, the only connection I can really see with true downtown right now is Friday night cruisers up and down Massachusetts Street connecting to this. But as far as walkability and bikeability, I don't see the connection. They need to have some provisions worked out with the city for the bridge to be a really true, better connection rather than these just narrow sidewalks.
Mr. Ullman, keep an eye on the clock.
Thank you. Circulation.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Randy Warren, 216 Lincoln, and I'm here to speak in favor of the development. For one reason, first reason is increasing the density of the population, which I hope puts some pressure on being able to establish a grocery store in North Lawrence. I figure if there's population there, there's going to be further needs. The other is to address the concern about pedestrian and bicycle access. I think it does need that. I haven't seen that in the plan. And perhaps in the future development, there could be a pedestrian bicycle bridge over the river to Bircham Park, or connecting East Lawrence from New York to 4th and Walnut to create that loop that's needed, I think, for the community. But that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Who else would like to speak? Do you have any other members of the public who'd like to speak on this item? Okay, with that, we will bring it back to the applicant, if you'd like to address any of the concerns that were spoken by the public.
Let's see. I like that one better. Or maybe that one. Happy to answer any questions. A couple of comments. Ted Boyle's correct. Stormwater, it's a huge concern. We deal with Matt on it every day. We submitted a stormwater study. It starts out actually fairly easy because we have so much land to handle the water. I mean, we get a big pond, which is not very exciting. It gets more complicated the more buildings we build as we go. So that is, that's kind of a moving target as we go forward. If the ultimate build out would create an underground storage and a pump. A majority of the time, the gates are open and we can drain the water, but he's correct that none of our water goes to North Second Street. So it's something we got to handle, and that's what we showed in the drainage study. We do, to Michael's comments, I see bike racks being all over the boardwalk and see that it's just being a great place for bicyclists and runners. And we love the idea of the change in actually the development plan from where we started years ago was leaving the levee path the way it sits today, so that we're not interrupting those people that want to use the levee in that way, and building this boardwalk that doesn't have cars. It is just pedestrian, bicycle. But you are correct. The thing that has been both on our minds and the city is, I think we want to go in together to KDOT and have somebody improve the bridge so that when we all walk across it, everybody's not scared to death that they're gonna fall into the river. But new railings on the bridge and, I mean, widening it would be great. New lights on the bridge, the correct lights, so it doesn't bother everybody, would be great. But, I mean, my office is downtown, we walk to Johnny's for lunch all the time, but, you know, we're all adults, and I'm not sure many people walk, you know, 2- and 3-year-olds across that bridge very often, or, you know, they don't do it again, so it's on our list. Some of this is a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing, and this goes back to the railroad, is that we can't tell anybody we have an approved project, or, you know, they go on the city's website, they still pull this up, and it looks like 400 tiny little parcels. So where I think we're in agreement is we feel we can make a lot more progress with the KDOTs of the world and the railroad and stuff when we can say, hey, this plan has been approved by the city of Lawrence, and now it's really gonna happen, so let's figure out how to deal with these things. So we're excited about it, love the positive comments. There's a lot going on, there's no doubt, but we have a long list of things, and this is one of the big check boxes to check off that gives us a whole lot more credibility with these other agencies that we gotta deal with. So, again, happy to answer any questions, but we're excited about it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we've closed the public comment time, and we'll bring it back to the commission for our discussion, and we may have questions. Go ahead. Commissioner Butler.
I have a couple questions for you, please. Can you tell me again what the minor tweaks to the staff report that you wanted?
So, condition D,
Okay.
it says, so we would rather, it says prior to the submission of a final development plan for any phase that you would meet the conditions of the HRC, we would like that to say prior to the approval of the final development plan. We're not sure why we can't submit the final development plan and these things run concurrently while we are working through the HRC. So we're thinking prior to the approval of the final development plan, the HRC approval for buildings within the environs of the depot be approved. Right now, it kind of reads that they get to look at all the buildings, and they're really not, seemed like they really weren't interested in anything outside of their environs.
Is that the only?
That's it.
Okay. My other question for you, looking at how many parking spaces that the city had estimated and that you had estimated, is the only entrance to this development at that intersection, or toward the back it looks like there might be one on the side of that building?
So currently, the only entrance, the only full access entrance is at the light.
Okay.
There is a right out, which we feel heading south will really help with so much traffic heading back towards downtown and going across the bridge. So none of that traffic we really feel will be at that light. Oop, sorry.
So you point at the
Can't point at the
screen there.
screen, didn't show up. So here it is. So this is a right out and an emergency entrance. Again, that would be just for fire vehicles and ambulance and stuff if there was something causing them problems at this entrance. So we have shown a possible at-grade crossing of the railroad here and possibly at Lyons. We like Lyons because there's already a light there. The properties on both sides of this are owned by the same group that owns this. So there's a viable option here. The traffic study we did, and it is about a real mixed-use project, or we would have problems. The traffic study did buildings 1 through 7, plus a 150-room hotel. And that intersection works. There's no argument that a third entrance or a second entrance or a full access point helps it. But that's where we're at today. And it's just another piece that we got to continue to work on.
And when you say, may I ask? When you say the first 7 buildings, so it's everything that's right there along Second Street, and then the first 3 buildings, whoa, okay, that,
It would be that.
okay.
Yeah.
And does staff concur that the access that we have is acceptable at that phase? So it's only after that point that an additional full access would be required? Also, on that access, I have another question
Okay.
about the emergency entrance that's the right out there. Do you have that other drawing that had all the fire trucks on it?
I do.
Okay.
Might take me a minute to get to it.
Because it seems to me there may be a barrier where a northbound fire truck can't cross into that and use it as an entrance. And all the fire trucks coming into that area will be coming northbound.
We have to remove, there's a concrete median right there. We have to remove that.
Okay, so
And
that's
put-
already part of the plan?
Correct. We have to remove that and put bollards. They use pipe bollards that they can remove when they want to access it. You're correct.
Okay.
I won't find it then, sorry.
Because I'll have another question on that drawing once you find it.
Okay, we'll find it.
Okay. I know it was early on.
Too many slides. I know there was a quicker way to do this, sorry. Okay.
There we go. It also shows fire vehicles crossing behind the buildings, but your other renderings show that those buildings actually open right out onto a levee boardwalk.
So it's a little bit of both, so there would be, where the mouse is, there would be bollards right here as well. And so this path, there are patios, for instance, shown adjacent to the building, but then there is a 26-foot wide path that would be open, clear path for the fire trucks along the width of all of those buildings.
So are you going to have to build all of that with the 6-inch gravel base and such to accommodate the weight of those vehicles?
And 8 inches of concrete,
Wow.
and yes, all of it.
All
So-
right. And is that path that's being used for the emergency vehicles, is that also the levee trail that you're talking about, or are those both separate? I see
So
some
we,
access.
so the levee trail is here.
Okay.
And so we see this, the boardwalk being this 26-foot wide path, that we see pockets on outside of that for the seating and area, but against the building, the fire department they get a 26-foot wide open area that would continue that length, and then that shows the fire truck being able to get back out.
And the Army Corps of Engineers is okay with the weight on the levee?
They haven't approved this yet.
Okay.
Again, so they want to see, so we've done, I'm glad you asked that. We have done a few things. So if anybody's been over there and seen a drill rig, we have done the most expensive soils report I've ever ordered in my life, has done borings down to bedrock all over this site. So we will have that information, but the Corps, they want that, and they want to know that we've got a viable project before they start to review it.
Okay.
But they did, just like the borings, they had to approve that plan, and we go through Matt Bond to do that, so they've seen all that, and they signed off on it, and so they're aware of it, and we're hoping to submit something more to them shortly.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Paul on access before we move to another issue?
I have a question. I'm not going to ask you to go back to the slide.
It's
with the,
okay, I can,
No,
I'm going to
It's
find
all right.
it here. There we
With
go.
the, that shows, speaking about the railroad, you said at-grade access. So, Paul, you outlined some of the issues that you're going to go into with the Army Corps of Engineers. Can you explain the process, or maybe staff can explain the process of getting approval with the railroad company to do that at-grade access?
So the railroad, their website's actually really helpful. They are a fairly large bureaucracy, for the lack of a better word, but we have found the right people to talk to. But their number one criteria for an at-grade crossing is that there's no other options. And if there's a site that's got no other options, I mean, I think this is it. You know, we've got the river on the west, we've got the bridge to the south. We're already accessing the points that we can see from the east, and then going north, The only way into the site's to cross the railroad.
Now, would you think that'd be a primarily emergency vehicle access only, or do you think that you would
It's
try to get that
we've-
at-grade access for residential and
What we've
business
sent
use?
them is kind of a three-part deal. One, an emergency entrance, exit, whatever, not the general public. Certainly, we'd like that sooner than later. We see a construction entrance. We're kind of hamstrung by starting near the entrance here, so as future phasers would come, we'd like to do that as a construction. But ultimately, you know, we'd like to have it as a third alternate for access. It helps everybody. Lyons already has a light. It's far enough away from North Second that there's stacking going both directions. But it is, it'll really help us to be able to tell them that this is the project that we'd like to go forward with.
I'll have another question. We heard some comments about bike ped access. Do you have a plan for that you want to walk us through?
Again, I think, you know, all good points. We missed the bus stop on the first go-around. You're exactly right about parking. We've had, there is an argument, and some people would tell you that we're actually providing too much parking already, because then it makes the site accessible to people wanting to drive versus Ubering. Lyft has changed just the ability, Friday night, Saturday night. There's a popular beer company on the Pennsylvania that I don't think anybody goes to with parking. Everybody Ubers to it. But it's a fair point that we need to be a little bit more cognizant of the bike paths. We see them in the site working great, and it probably is a little bit more to look at how they get into the site. And we talked about a bridge over North Second, so you don't even have to use the stoplight to cross the street would be great. Same idea, a pedestrian and bike path across the river would be great. I don't know if that fits in anywhere here. We really would like to see the bridge access for pedestrians and bicycles improved. So hopefully this thing can, push that forward.
Madam Chair, may I interject also, because, one thing that hasn't been stated yet is that this area actually has been included in the downtown master plan
point.
area, if you recall. And access from downtown to North Lawrence on the bigger picture is a necessary discussion item. And so we're hopeful that the downtown master plan process identifies these issues and some solutions and some options to hit not just this area, but the broader area as well. And so, we're actually pretty early, and this is a large project, an important project, and it's going to take multiple steps of review and process and action steps to get to even the first building, I think. So I just wanted to mention that downtown master plan as well.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question about parking. So, having visited Johnny's a long time ago in college, parking can get pretty full pretty quick. Talk to me, so that garage parking, are you restricting that to residents? Is that your plan? Or
We see the garage parking for the residents.
Yeah.
And as Rick would tell you too, he wants all those spaces that you see right there now available in the afternoons. But that's right. That's where I'd say that we're as cognizant of it as anybody else, that we know what that number's, what we think it's got to be and how it's got to work.
And so, to Sandy, or Paul, whichever, you guys work together. Are you confident that there's enough residential parking for those residents? I think about events and things, and my big concern becomes 4th of July, and all that great boardwalk for fireworks or whatever we got going on. But I want to make sure the residents have a place to park too. Have you thought that through, and can you walk us through it?
I have thought about it. There are two things. One, when we looked at the parking analysis based on straight coding, what that number would be, which is quite substantially high. By introducing shared parking, you start to knock that number down, but still within the framework of what the Land Development Code says. I think we may have some discussion. If you'll recall, the Alvamar project required specifically parking to be provided for the residential uses at that particular rate. Whether or not we're willing to forego that or look at more of that shared parking piece, I think, one, we have to get on the same page with having the right base number to know. I think we're very close. If I could tell you that this plan absolutely shows the adequate parking, I can't do that. Not at this point. By the time we have a final development plan, yes, I would be able to answer that question fully.
And I might just add, I think that's a bit of a hybrid, and we've been talking about this for years with Paul and his group. It's got CD zoning, or we're recommending CD zoning, but it doesn't enjoy the benefit of the public providing the parking. So parking and the public isn't planning on providing the parking as of yet, right? I mean, that's not in the request or the talks or anything. So, which is why you're seeing, and so what we're essentially trying to do is apply the code to the area. And I think Paul makes a good point that there's enough land area here to both supply what we think it would be adequate parking, and then as the years and decades go through, if the world changes like we all think it might, there's enough area there to infill with building and activity and take away some parking. So I think that's where I'm starting from in terms of thinking about the parking.
And just to add a couple of things, the shared parking table, I'm hesitant to bring it up or we'll start talking about spreadsheets, but it is from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., I'll get the exact time wrong, residential's parked at 100%. So the only times you're really sharing parking, I mean, those residents are taken care of, is when, in theory, bars and restaurants close and at night, so people come home at, 3 o'clock in the morning from their job or whatever, and they have a place to park. It's during the day when it is about the assumption of how many people go to work and how many people are coming here to an office and how many people are going to the restaurant at lunch and dinner that already live there. And then, you throw a hotel into it, which we like. A hotel doesn't have access. 150 people come into a hotel and never show up at the same time. It's not a theater when you've got all these people who are trying to hit this spot at the same time. So all those things combined, we think works. But, a little bit to add on to what Scott said, it really is, it's all about restaurants. If buildings 5 and 6 were all restaurants, which we don't think they would be, I mean, we would have a problem if we didn't have a parking garage. That's the deal. But, by the time we get to that, we're gonna know who's already there and who's on a lease and what we think will happen. So we feel pretty good about that.
And I would only add, that's really why parking is best addressed at the final development plan, when we know the uses, because there's a range of parking calcs to apply to the use, especially in a mixed-use development.
So I want to make sure we got that right. Rick, you're closing at 10, right? So the residents can, just kidding. And
But all
I'm
his
joking,
employees
I'm
will
joking.
live there.
Yes,
So-
of course, yeah, that will work. So Sandy, and Scott, can you just walk for the public through how the next parts of the plan, if it's approved tonight, will be approved? Because we talked about a number of phases and a number of things that we don't know yet. And, will this plan come back on when we see the next phase? Or is that administratively done, or do we only see it with the final plat? Well, we may not see it, but, yeah.
Okay. So there are a number of applications that will be coming forward with this. One is the preliminary plat, which is where we are going to dig deeper into what the public improvement plans are. That will be a document that comes to this body. Then there will be a final plat that is generally administrative, although the city commission will be on the hook for accepting easements that are associated with it, and the public improvement plans must be completed before that final plat can be recorded. The final development plans are administrative, and we would be looking at that project based on the framework that we establish here with the preliminary development plan. If we cannot come to resolution between the applicant and staff based on this established framework, there would be an appeal, and I would have to double-check the code to find out if that comes to this body or to the city commission. Off the top of my head, I don't recall. Because that middle phase, that building 9, 10, and 11, is an unknown quantity quite substantially, staff's recommendation is, at that point, the preliminary development plan comes back to the planning commission. Does that help?
Yeah, and I'm glad to see Paul doing this
That's
as
it.
well.
Yeah, I would agree, when we get to building 9, we'll bring it back.
I think she said 7, 8.
No,
What?
8.
8, 9.
But I would also note that, yeah, we'll work off, if this gets approved, we'll work off this plan. The code allows us to do minor modifications. It establishes thresholds for that before it's resubmitted to the planning commission for review.
Thanks.
If we're on the providing kind of background information for the public here and the 3 people watching on YouTube. I got 3 laughs.
Two more than Monday.
Yeah. So, give everybody kind of a quick primer, if you would, please, on the controls that are put in place with the plan development overlay. I think that's an important
good.
feature of this application that
Yeah, I
that
think
maybe not everybody understands.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because, this is a really important location, obviously. And this has been part of the discussion about making sure that with the city properties that are needed to congregate land and make this project a whole piece, we've talked a lot about the controls to make sure the community gets a quality project, mixed use, benefit of the river, that sort of thing. So we decided that the PD overlay was the first step, and it's a pretty good protection because anything that is again, changes from the plan that is approved has to go back through a zoning process, and that's a full public hearing with notice and planning commission and city commission. On top of that, Sandy had mentioned that the city is working on an agreement with the applicants about when we're at our highest confidence level that this is the plan or a plan that is approved, it has reached a point where we're confident that it will go forward, and that's when we can release the city's property. So we've got a lot of controls, you could put it that way, that we're working to put in place. The PD overlay is one of them because the city controls the zoning, right? But as we know, those things can change, and we've got some properties and locations where we've talked about how different areas get approved one way and then change over time. So we're also cognizant of that, and we're just sort of walking baby steps through this until we can agree that we've got a plan of a high quality that really puts the benefit on the river.
Can I also clarify, when you talked about the public improvement data will come in with a preliminary plat, which we're not talking about yet tonight, would that include like the stormwater and how that's being dealt with? Is that something that,
All of those studies are have either been submitted or being refined either by the applicant or staff looking at those things. So, yes, we will have information with the preliminary plat. The actual design of those systems, of the water, of the storm sewer, of the sanitary sewer, of the public sidewalks, all of those elements come with the final plat. Those are technical documents that are reviewed for compliance with city design standards. So those elements don't come to you, but the scope of what is required would be a commentary staff would provide.
okay, thank you.
Can I have another question for staff? This should be an easy one. one of the actions you want us to do tonight is reaffirm the comp plan amendment that was passed by the city commission in 2012. Can you give me a little more, I saw the background from the PC from 2012, but can you give me a little more background on the why we need to reaffirm a CPA from that far back?
We struggled with it a little bit, but procedurally, we think it just makes sense, given it's been 7 years.
Okay.
To look at it. We didn't present very much to it. We're sort of going from a basis that that's not a necessary full presentation and hearing to look at. Essentially, that comp plan amendment expanded the downtown area of the comp plan. So that was the crux of the discussion at that time.
But, I mean, it's part of the comp plan now. It's,
Well, as Sandy said, we haven't made it effective
Okay.
because we haven't done the zoning for it. So we
Okay.
were sort of waiting to have some of the other elements of the application catch up to it. And at the time, we were thinking that design guidelines would be created and brought to the commission for review. We sort of took a different angle to it over time and decided instead to do a PD overlay instead of the guidelines.
you bring up something about design guidelines that Mr. Boyle had brought up earlier. The request of his to have the general design of the exterior of the building kind of in general match. Is guaranteeing design guidelines part of preliminary plat that we approve, or is it part of PD overlay?
So for this project, it's that historic review that are going to be applied in terms of design guidelines. We will not apply the downtown design guidelines.
Okay.
To do that, we would have to amend those guidelines to apply here. And we're not, in many discussions with the applicant and internally, we're not sure they're applicable with this kind of development when you really study them. So we have chosen to do the PDP and the historic review. And really what we've talked about is those buildings closest to the depot getting the highest level of review, and the ones on the river getting the lowest level of review by the HRC.
So, to follow that, then the development plan, the PD overlay, makes a link between what would be required there back to what that determination is made by Historic Resources. So they're in that process. They have not made those final determinations. By having the PD with a condition that says, once those are approved, that becomes the standard that gets applied to this development. So it links them, the two back together.
Okay. And then, Paul, if I could ask you a question real quick. The renderings that you had up there, do those reflect matching or complementing the design of the station, or no?
What we presented is that, and I think this would be an interpretation of what Ted said, is that, I mean, we can't make it look like the depot, but it's really about real materials, that the lower two levels are stone, and yes, there's brick up above, and maybe there's some metal panels, but it's all, real materials. There's not lap siding. We don't want to build a 7-story building with lap siding. It's about commercial grade, similar, real downtown type of materials that would go into the project.
Thank you for indulging me.
Thank you. If I could follow back up on what Commissioner Sands was asking about the CPA reaffirmation, just procedurally, since you're asking the body to reaffirm it, but we don't have any of the data or anything that went into the consideration for approving it in the first place in front of us, do we really have everything we need to reaffirm?
I think we had the staff report from that time in your
Yeah.
packet. We have that
Yeah.
much. We didn't
And-
present much in our presentation.
Right. I mean, one of the things I noticed in reading that was it seemed like there was a lot of discussion of the impact it would have on downtown Lawrence, and it was discussion of vacancy rates and those sorts of things using data or studies from 8 years ago now. And I just didn't know, I guess, do we have what we need to be able to say, yeah, what they decided 8 years ago is true today? Or do we have can we even say no? I mean, do we have the right as a the ability as a body right here to say, no, we're not gonna reaffirm that thing. I just wanna make sure, as we go forward, that we're not just.
So going back to the original application, we required the applicant to submit the comp plan amendment to support, because, again, going for CD zoning, and taking advantages of that district, we felt like we should have a discussion about expanding downtown. We had that discussion at the planning commission and city commission, and the city commission supported that. Again, we didn't make it effective. Now that we've even taken steps with our downtown master plan to show it as part of our downtown based on that city commission agenda, Commissioner Sinclair, I think you bring up a good point. If the city commission is already, normally you would do a comp plan amendment, it would go in the comp plan and be good until it gets revised or used, right? But this was a little bit different because it was project specific. And so that's why I think we wanted just to get it out there in front of the commission, in front of the public again, to not go through some of the grueling discussion we may have gone before, but to note that it does lay the foundation for the zoning today. I didn't really answer your question, but
So I have a-
if you could recommend
A bunch of questions.
denial or deny it, I guess, and then it wouldn't have the support for the zoning and PDP.
Right, okay, so there was gonna be my question, was, it seems like either and this may not be a question, I may just be talking now. So, it seems like either we need to look at the comprehensive plan amendment all over again and vote on that, or we need to say, this project now, that comprehensive plan amendment now applies to this project. It seemed, I'm conflicted on the idea that, well, it sort of applies, so can you guys just confirm it so we can't have that conversation again? Because I think that's what I just heard you say, Scott. We don't want to stir up that big conversation again. So let's not talk about it and
if you
just have you
could-
guys reaffirm it.
I think from our perspective, in 7 years, nothing has changed to the extent of changing, in my mind, what the commission did with the CPA amendment, with the request. Now, we're going to be publishing a retail market study very soon. That's usually what we look at in terms of some of the downtown issues, right? Maybe we complicated by bringing it forward in the first place. We had an option, right? We had an option to stand on the decision in 2011 or to bring it forward with the zoning request and its decision in 2011 without rehashing everything. There's a third option, is let's rehash everything. So I think that's where we're at with it.
So wouldn't the decision from 2011 stand? You said it was agreed upon but not implemented.
Well, that's the gray area, is that we didn't publish it into the comp plan because it had a pending rezoning associated with it. That was very project specific. So it wasn't a comp plan amendment that was an umbrella policy issue necessarily. It was related more specifically to the site.
If it had been within a neighborhood plan, would we have just, in 2011, would that have just been a change to that plan? Or would it still have been required a comprehensive plan amendment?
Likely, but it was a little bit of a package deal at the time. The CPA, the zoning, the design guidelines, and then when we didn't get those guidelines into review, time started. And it's not like anybody was not working on it. The applicant had been working on it this entire time. But, so we chose our option to bring it forward as sort of a standing effective, but not really effective because it never got published. So, and I guess there's an argument to say that we could have written it into the plan and published it into the plan, and then a different project altogether could have come in and requested downtown zoning and done a plan. That's an option as well. But for better or worse, it didn't get published into the plan, and here we sit 7 years later without the plan reflecting it.
What do you want to say to that?
I don't know yet.
I'm going to say it sounds like, the legislature passes a statute and it doesn't get published, therefore it's not, it's just, they had the discussion, they voted they wanted to do it, but it never became effective. So we're being asked to make it effective tonight. And I'm not even clear what it was, and we're being told part of it doesn't apply anymore. The requirement to create separate design guidelines for this.
That was associated with the zoning, not the plan amendment.
Okay.
So how confident are you, if we don't reaffirm it, how confident are you that the comprehensive, that now you publish it, right, without us reaffirming it? How confident are you that the comprehensive plan addresses this project? The new version with it published? Am I making sense there?
We're confident that it supports this project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Kelly.
I tend to agree with that. I mean,
Okay.
the new comp plan we're looking at, this certainly fits
Right.
into everything we're talking about. I mean, I've got some little issues, but nothing big. But this does seem to be a slight stumbling block, what we're
Well,
doing
I
with
mean, I'm
this
just not-
dangling comp plan
If it
amendment.
pleases the commission, it wasn't excruciating revision to the plan, we could bring up on the screen and show you the parts of the plan that were amended to support the project in 2011.
I think that would be the least that we would expect if we were to affirm it. Right, I mean, we'd
Well,
want
I-
to see what we're affirming, yes?
I read the minutes.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting because downtown Lawrence had an opinion. I think the chamber had an opinion. Chuck Magrill had an opinion. None of them are here tonight.
Right.
So, and this is more of the meat and potatoes of this project than I would have said the comp plan amendment is. The points about the vacancy rate that were made in those minutes, the retail vacancy rate in downtown may have been low. I'm not gonna try to say I've memorized every vacancy rate in downtown retail from 2012 to here. But I feel as if the vacancy rate dipped down and now it's starting to creep back up. So it's cyclical. So I don't know how much, certainly the comp plan amendment that was passed by the city commission in 2012 didn't affect the downtown vacancy rate. The idea is, does the project itself, once built out, affect that? And I go back to my first point of, all those folks that were there in 2012 for a comp plan amendment are not here now to say they don't like the project.
Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, we did publish on the agenda this issue. If you look on your packet, page 77, at the bottom of digital page 77, you'll see the part of the staff report that we put in the packet from 2011 that actually shows the language, and the italics is the new language, and we delete some language. That's, those few sections of the comprehensive plan were proposed and then again ultimately approved by the governing body to support this project at that time. And it did include a few, policy statements related to it.
But it really didn't speak to the zoning of that area, right? It just included it as part of the downtown
Correct.
structure, right? So in that way, I feel comfortable.
It basically described the area.
Yeah.
Right.
It described it, said it should be considered as an extension of downtown, but it didn't get into everything we're looking at tonight, the details that are before you tonight.
Yeah, I feel a little, I don't feel like we have, I don't know. I just struggle a little bit with this idea of reaffirming something that I feel like has already been done. It just wasn't published because the project wasn't there. Because I don't know, as I read through the packet, I was sort of like, what is this? Why are we reading all this? What is happening here? Because
Yeah.
it seemed like it was already done, so I
And
guess I
really-
was sort of surprised by that.
And really, page 80 is the meat of the criteria that was approved, which is being reflected in this plan very well, I think.
You talking about block D in the
Yes.
italics with the
Yeah.
4 points?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Except for the 50,000 versus 25,000 square feet? Is that different?
Yes, there's a little bit of conflict in the comp plan and the code on that issue. That's why we brought up the 25,000. That's something we're working through.
So if we reaffirm this, does it go back to the 50,000 square feet, or?
Well, the
The code
policy
is- the code
notes the
conflict.
50,000. Yeah, there's a little bit of internal discussion about there's the comp plan language, and there's the code language, and whether the intent was to not have large buildings take up the downtown. You know, we like those 25-foot patterned, mixed-use structures and active pedestrian corridors. And so that's the intent, so that you don't get too large of a store in the area and start consolidating, sort of like consolidate lots into one mega building. It's the same concept, so.
So would it be helpful to you if we affirmed the comprehensive plan but changed that to 25,000 square feet?
Actually, not necessarily. We may want to
Okay.
come back with the code or something. I think it's
Well,
good as it is.
Weren't some of the buildings that were proposed possibly looking at being over 25,000 square feet?
Yeah,
There-
that's what.
Yeah, the hotel building was shown at, I think, 30,000, and then there was another one of the buildings, I think it was at 28,000. The code language about limiting square foot in the CD district is actually in Article 2 of the Land Development Code. It's a very obscure location for that kind of a standard. So we've talked some about text amendment. We have talked about how we're making a change. This is a change to Horizon 2020, soon to be replaced with another document.
So we hope.
So there's, I'm confident it will be. So,
You got through one paragraph last.
so there are a lot of elements at play here, but it was important, I think, to staff to at least recognize that there is this other piece of this project out there, of that entitlement process. The project has kind of remained alive. We have a preliminary, an approved preliminary plat on file that has been extended. It is a living document. So these things all still tie together, even with the length going on. We just thought it was important to recognize what was going on with it.
So, just to keep going on this.
Riveting, isn't it?
Would it be a problem if we just approved, assuming we did want to, if the body wanted to send everything to the city commission with approval, and just didn't speak to the CPA?
The planning commission, as you know, has a responsibility for approving comp plan amendments. So you're more of an approval body than not on the comp plan amendment. So I think to provide as strong a legal basis for this project, we would want to do that. And if you've got some options, you can review what you have, and we can talk through it and take it on tonight, or if you want a fuller presentation with it in a more visible agenda item and publication, we could defer to another meeting and have that discussion. But I think it's best for the project to have a strong foundation legally through the comp plan.
Will the city commission also be asked to reaffirm the CPA?
Yes.
See, I was hoping you would just say that the city commission's decision is binding, so it doesn't matter. I mean, they made the decision, right?
And it may be. We were conservatively looking at anytime we actually changed our processes years ago. We had been doing a lot of rezonings through the process, getting commission approval, and then they may have conditions to follow. Usually it was have to final plat it before it's effective, so we wouldn't publish it in the paper. They would hang for years out there, not showing up on any zoning map or not being published. And so we had to change that whole system, and this is sort of like that. We felt like, because it's been 7 years and wasn't applied to any project, we felt like we needed to bring it back. I feel now like where we missed it is we didn't present it fully, we didn't have a separate agenda item for it, and we didn't give it its due respect to this point.
And it'll require a separate vote, even though it does not have a separate item?
Yes,
Okay.
it is part of this item. It's been
Well,
in the blurb.
I do wish it had been its own item so that it could be a standalone discussion, but I don't really have a problem with reaffirming the work that had a full public process at that time. So that's where I stand. I'll throw that out.
Madam Chair, I agree with you, although I think we could vote it as a separate item, but either way we do it, I read through this portion of it. The planning commissioners who made comment on there were people that in my time in serving with them, I thought were very thoughtful. And so I took specific commentary to heart on those. And I'm fairly comfortable with reaffirming.
Can you share some of that?
Absolutely. Just give me a second and I'll, yeah.
And while you're doing that, though, I mean, the planning commission wasn't able to recommend approval, right?
It's split 4-4, and that's the other thing, is that they didn't have a full body.
While Commissioner Sands is looking for that, Mr. Warner, could you come up? About approaching the railroad, about that other access. What exactly do you, in speaking with them, what exactly do you need in place to go forward with that conversation about that access point? Do you need the preliminary plan, or do you, the rezoning that combines the properties? Which part of it
I
is
mean,
needed?
I think what we think we need is a preliminary plan that I can say, here's a preliminary development plan that has been approved by, we'd start with this body while we're waiting for the city commission, but that I can tell them that this has really been approved and we're moving through, and that this isn't just, some pipe dream, and that they don't know that we have any approvals at all, and whether we're wasting their time, or is this something really we ought to start talking about.
Because I think ultimately, it comes down to me that the right out only exit that could be a possible emergency entrance seems a little iffy in a big emergency right there on the bridge. So
We
I'd
don't like
like
big
to
emergencies.
see, that other access that the fire department could use
We do
to really be a top priority. If we can get to that stage that you can get those conversations going and make that happen.
No, I'd agree with all that. I mean, so while we're talking and we talk about emergencies, the one advantage, our building code gets stringent, more stringent. I mean, brand new buildings, all sprinklers, fire alarms, all those sorts of things. When, when you get to a 7-story building on the levee, for instance, they're called pressurized stairways. I mean, there's a lot of building code things that come with them, and certainly you need to be able to get a fire truck there. But in the big scheme of things, these are, very safe buildings. But absolutely, we want that third point as much as anybody.
All right. Thanks.
Still looking, Commissioner Sands? Go ahead, Commissioner Sinclair.
Mr. Warren, can I ask you a question too? Before I sit down?
Stay up here.
You don't need to pull up the diagram if you don't want, but could you give us a sense, or me, if I'm the one that cares, a sense of where the two homes are, and then the mobile home park, in terms of what where they are with reference to the buildings that are going to be built eventually.
So these, this is what you're at, these are the two homes that are
Okay.
being demolished. It's a unused industrial building. That's the edge of Betty's on Johnny's, and then there's the grain elevator. But the mobile home park is most people have been moved, they've moved out, they've offered to help them move their trailers.
Okay.
Clean it up, so there's very few people there right now.
Okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner Payton.
I hate to bring it back to parking, because I know it can be talked about later, but I just wanted to see if I understood something. Scott, did you say that they can put in parking, whatever ends up being required, and then take it out if things change and not as much as needed?
Right, right. I was speaking to sort of our evolution of transportation, and if parking lots aren't needed in the future, that can be turned into building space.
So I have a question. Is it possible somehow now to do sort of the reverse, to keep some sort of like green space that's almost like a parking reserve, and to put in less parking, and then if it's needed, add it in?
Not if we were to apply the code required parking.
Okay.
Well, what we're proposing to be code required, again, the CD district doesn't require parking, but what we're trying to do is land on a shared parking
Right.
proposal that is based on the code.
But Commissioner Payton, the new comprehensive plan actually calls for changing some of those codes to sort of address some of the, we may be sort of in between plans and codes.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but I mean, to be brutally honest, my observation is we still need the parking that our code requires. We're not quite there yet, and I know the arguments about, well, it's because we keep putting parking on the ground. But, and a little bit of this is developer driven, right? They need to have the parking they need to sustain their residential and commercial. They can't lease a unit if they can't tell someone with a car that they have a space. But it's a little bit in flux right now. We're getting different stories from different developers about what they need on the ground to serve their uses. So that's why I think the best approach is to provide the parking that the code calls for today in the worst case scenario, and then there's opportunity later to fill that in with other use as this transportation evolution sort of happens.
I do like this talk about the shared use, the shared parking. I think that's certainly the mental construct we need to be bringing to this, and I'm glad to see that, especially with the mixed-use proposal. Yes?
Commissioner Carpenter, did you want to know which commissioner, or did you want the specific quotes?
Kind of maybe let everybody know.
Sure.
What that conversation was, but.
Well, do you want me to summarize the conversation that was in the packet?
Yeah. Yeah, let's do that.
That's about 12 pages.
Summarize it.
Okay. I will tell you that the commissioner that, it was Commissioner Lease. What's that? Nothing. The commissioner was Commissioner Lease, and here on page 92, he said he viewed the comprehensive plan amendment as an opportunity to preserve downtown. He didn't see any data that would detract from Mass Street. He said the comp plan amendment would just support the concept of spreading downtown over the bridge. He says further in here, he thought it was a good idea to extend boundaries. Something going on that was, businesses represented tonight, there was something going on that was reducing the amount of pull that Massachusetts Street has. He felt it was a mistake to overlook the residents of North Lawrence who wanted the project. Several other places, Commissioner Leese also said that he would have liked to have heard more support from the neighborhood, and we have that here tonight. Mr. Boyle was the only one present that supported it from North Lawrence. So, last time? Yeah, last time. While we're on the subject of parking, though, so there's a lot of articles out there about what happens to neighborhoods and cities when parking minimums are done away with. And it's a bold move, and I'm not sure that I agree fully with removing parking minimums. But there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, mostly in Strong Towns articles, so take that with a grain of salt, that projects like this that do not have parking minimums still achieve the level of density that the project needs, and they still achieve the level of parking that the project needs. It's just not wrote to the formula of the city. I say that with a lot of caution because every city has their own parking standards and parking minimums and parking tables. So I don't know if ours is the most appropriate. I don't know if it's too high, if it's too low. I would say in general, by reading those things, I would maybe err on the side of slightly less parking because it does make it more walkable. When you have fewer cars, the idea being on the traffic pattern with that level of setback, you have fewer cars, that it reduces the speed limit, or it reduces the speed at which the cars move down the road. So I'm not sure where I'm at on it yet, but for this site, I would think it has so many similarities to the anecdotal stories that I've read about other cities with this level of density that are trying to achieve this level of density, that less parking may be better.
It's a good night for planning, because I can advise you that in a few months, we'll be bringing a comprehensive rewrite of our parking code to the Planning Commission for review and discussion. And so keep all these concepts handy, because we're going to be presenting some changes in how we look at parking. But it is a huge community discussion anytime we get a development of any intensity. So I'm not sure we'll take off the minimums, but maybe there's some room in there to work on the changing view of parking.
Not a good night. When is it not a good night for planning?
It's always a good night for planning in my world.
And is it not one of the conditions, I'd have to find it here real quickly, of approval that the applicant and the staff work together to come to terms between that 802 parking spaces and 998 parking spaces? So, and the current code will inform that. I'd like to maybe get a little closer to somebody making a motion on several of the items that we have here. But I want to ask first, is it our prerogative to take a separate vote on this comprehensive plan amendment reaffirmation that we've been asked to do? Or are we allowed to do that because that would be like putting in an agenda item that was not advertised?
You may just read from our recommendation on the staff report, page 60, is where we give that to you.
We've heard some reservations about the reaffirmation of that. Is there anybody who'd like to, feel strongly one way or the other? We need to have any more discussion about that part of it before we look at a motion?
I don't have any reservations about that, but I do have a question for Scott before we move on to a motion, and that is the intersection of the timing of the downtown area plan as opposed to the anticipated timeline of this project. Because my biggest concerns with this aren't about the project itself, but the externalities around circulation of pedestrians, bicycles, cars. Expanding the downtown area across the river. Mr. Warner brought up issues around pedestrian safety on the bridge, kids walking on that path. Mr. Allman brought up the issue of cyclists.
Right.
I mean, all of those are things that really need to be dealt with as part of the downtown plan and potentially even involving KDOT. So I'm curious about how you would see that, that impact.
Well, the downtown plan should be completed by the end of 2019. And I think that, I would presume that this project is a multi-year project, right? Anything that comes out of the downtown plan that's a capital item would need to get into a capital improvement plan schedule. We haven't talked a lot about the river boardwalk area, but that's something that I would hope that the city and applicant can talk about improvements and enhancements and who's responsible, and there's been some preliminary discussions there. KDOT obviously is a participant in any of those things, so there's just there's a lot of work to do on all of those externalities. I appreciate you thinking about them like that because they exist today.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever we do helps North Lawrence and helps downtown, there's that relationship there. So, yeah, that's a little bit what I can tell you on the timing of those things.
Okay. And then just my other concern has to do with the final plan, the final site plan, which I guess we'll have a chance to, review and approve. But I just want to register my concern around circulation of pedestrians and cyclists and how they intersect with automobiles in that area in between the proposed building footprints.
Yeah, and-
Especially I think it was Mr. Werner brought up the issue around things like Uber and Lyft.
Mhm.
And in urban environments, there's a huge problem with drop-off points and how cars circulate around them and how pedestrians circulate around them. So I would just ask in advance for that to be explicitly dealt with. And also with the limited access points, I don't see the write-out as such a problem, but it seems to me there needs to be a very clear and clearly signed circulation route around the site so that private automobiles as well as, ride shares have really clear ideas of where they can go in and out.
Those are all great comments, but with one correction is that the final development plan will be administrative. So the city commission sees this preliminary development plan, and as long as it stays congruent with this plan, you won't see it
Okay.
again, but just so you know.
Well, then I'm especially glad I brought it up. So.
Do we need to make that a condition of approval on the PDP, that those things be considered? Or is that something that we can just have the applicant take under advisement
I
based
think
on
we
our
take it under
discussion?
advisement as your direction to staff.
Okay.
As long as we're adding concerns, and I think probably Mr. Allman brought this up as well, is the bus drop-off or public transit. How is this site going to interact with that plan, and is there going to be a special consideration for?
Yeah, so some of these questions haven't been answered yet because there's work to be done with the transit department, the transit system and how it works in the entire system of things. And because there's phases involved, how they treat this area may change, it may not change for a while. So, yeah, but it will definitely be a part of the overall process.
I would say this is a bear of a project with all the different owners and all the different lots and all of the different moving parts, as well as having had taken so long, and then we're back to looking at reaffirming previous work. But I'm very excited about it. I think it is a great addition to kind of extend downtown, and I think it's an opportunity I'd like to see move forward. So I like the concerns that people have brought up, and I think that will be taken under consideration. We will still see the preliminary plat in the future.
Yes.
So we will have another chance to talk about some more details with that, but I'm comfortable moving forward for my, have any other, yes.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of the request to rezone approximately 16.116 acres from general industrial, commercial strip, and open space to downtown commercial plan development overlay district, and to affirm the findings for publication of PCR 1-1-12 and CPA 11-8-11, expanding the identified boundaries of downtown Lawrence located at 311, 317, 401, 409, 415, 501, and 505 North Second Street, based on the findings presented in the staff report and forwarded to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval.
We have a motion. It's very well done. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, I think Commissioner Carpenter got there. What other discussion? Commissioner Butler?
I just had a question on, Mr. Warner had wanted some changes to the language in condition D.
That's on the
That's on the
PDG.
next
It's on,
one.
okay.
And we're friendly to that, by the way, the change.
Any other discussion? Okay. Okay.
Just for city commissioners out there reading this, I think we're affirming that comprehensive plan amendment. I'll vote for it, but I'll tell you, I'm doing it with some hesitation because I do think I would have liked to have considered the comprehensive plan amendment separately first. I almost made a motion to pull that out, but I think that ship has probably sailed, and this is probably the best that we can do at this point.
And I would add, for the same reasons, I'll oppose it, just because I think for all the reasons we already talked about, we're on the one hand, operating as though this is something that's already been approved, and on the other hand, we're supposed to reaffirm it, which is essentially just approve it as though it's before us for the first time without, I don't think, the same sort of robust, full-throated discussion we would in a comp plan amendment. So I'm going to oppose it for that reason.
And it's specifically, you're opposing the portion of it that's reaffirming?
Yeah,
the-
super ticky-tacky technical.
Okay. No, I appreciate that.
I would just add, I share reservations about that, and I'm glad that we're going to have one no vote, which means the city commission will be discussing that matter and actually reaffirming what their predecessors had done.
Right.
But I'm going to vote, since we do have our no vote, I'll go ahead and stick with my second, and I'll vote in favor of it today.
Mr. Struckle?
I also had some of the same reservations about approving a not previously approved CPA, but I will support it. I'm comfortable with the work they did, and I also want to thank Mr. Allman and the other commenters who spoke about bicycle and pedestrian accessibility there. That's going to be an important part of this development, I think, and it's going to extend back across the rivers where those concerns begin, on this side of the river, on that bridge. The transit issue, that the bus there needs a place out of the way to pull over, embark, and disembark people. It can't be in the street. It might not be in the development. It might be across the street, but there needs to be a place there where it is clear and accessible and doesn't impede traffic. But I am excited about this project, and I'm ready to vote.
All right. We have any more discussion?
I just wanted to add about the pedestrian. The commissioner struck off, Mr. Allman. All three of us were on the Burrows Creek Trail Plan. I believe that pedestrian bike bridge was still part of that and was approved. So we still have that out there. So maybe it's time somebody dust that off and see if that's something that can be worked into these future discussions as we try to expand into North Lawrence, expand downtown that direction.
It would be interesting to know whether a new pedestrian and bicycle bridge in cost would be comparable to improvements required to the existing bridge, to bring that up to the standards I think we expect here in the 21st century. The bridge that Commissioner Carpenter is talking about, I think, was first proposed from near the city water treatment plant to 8th and Oak. That's a little bit far from this development. One closer would be just fine with me.
The idea was we need that pedestrian bike access from downtown to the levee. And we do have one plan that recommended that had been approved.
Are we ready to take a vote? This is a vote on the rezoning only. All in favor of approval? And opposed? 9-1. Do we have anyone who would like to make a motion on the preliminary development plan? And this is the one where
This one.
both staff and the applicant were interested in changing or approved the changing of, on point D, changing the word prior to submission of the final development plan to prior to the approval, so that the Historic Resources Commission can be working within that time frame between submission and approval.
So I'll make a motion to recommend approval of PDP 1800506 North Lawrence Riverfront Preliminary Development Plan based on the finding of facts presented in the body of the staff report and forwarding a recommendation for approval to the City Commission subject to the conditions listed with an amendment to D prior to the approval, I believe is what I got from you, Paul, right? And the city's okay, and the planning department's okay with that. Prior to the approval of the final development plan for any phase of the development for the site project to demonstrate compliance with applicable conditions for building height, massing, and scale as approved by the HRC.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Struckoff. Do we have any other discussion?
So some of the concerns that Commissioner Carter brought up, are any of those appropriate to be put into here as additional conditions? Or interaction with mass transit, or?
I would argue that I have confidence from listening to staff that those items that Commissioner Carter brought up will be addressed as we get closer to the preliminary plat and the final development plan.
I do also. So we have a motion, a second. Any other discussion? All in favor? And opposed? We have 10-0. And we've finished our first item for the night.
Welcome to Planning Commission.
We suspect that the others might go faster, but I would propose a 6-minute break, and then we will tackle item number 3. So we will reconvene in 6 minutes.
don't spread your allergies this far.
Well,
All right, not sure if that was exactly 6, but I think we're ready to get back rolling again with item number 3, rezoning on Austell Road.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Mary Miller, one of the planning staff, and this rezoning is for a pretty small parcel. It's less than 1/5 of an acre. It's part of the Pine Ridge Plaza PCD, and the request is to rezone it to commercial strip, just a base zoning district. And this graphic illustrates the property that was rezoned in 2017. Also, it was a part of the Pine Ridge Plaza PCD. I'm trying to get my mouse to show it. It's shown in black here. And it was going to be included with this property. 3 lots would be platted into 1 lot and developed with a storage, mini storage and maybe some boat storage. As the developer worked on his plans, he decided he wanted to purchase a small bit of the property to the south. It's about 30 feet deep, and include that with the lot to increase his area. And so the minor subdivision was in the process, but to avoid having split zoning, this zoning request is before you, just to change that sliver shown in red from PCD to CS. It's very similar to the previous one. This kind of shows the area, and the yellow line is the subject property. The whole area is zoned commercial. It's a blend, except for this, which is the GPI for the post office. So it's a blend of planned commercial, and then the highlighted areas are already commercial strip. The character of the area is primarily commercial to the west of Osdol and retail or residential to the east. So the rezoning request, besides being very small in scope, is compatible with the neighborhood. It's also compatible with the plans for the neighborhood, which recommends commercial uses. And I won't go through these various golden factors. We discussed those with the previous rezoning. But it is compliant with the comprehensive plan. The property is suitable to the uses restricted in both districts because they're very similar. Just the PCD requires the development plan, and going to the CS district allows them to develop with a site plan. And so staff recommends forwarding this rezoning request to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Mary. And is the applicant here?
I'm Joy Ray with Paul Werner Architects. Good evening. I'm thinking this one's going to go a little bit faster, but Mary did a great job. Pretty simple and straightforward, and we're in agreement with the staff report and everything that's there, and we are good to move forward.
Thank you. Do you have any members of the public that would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, we will bring it back up to the commission for discussion. We saw this property not long ago, and this seems to be gives them a little bit more flexibility with the space that they have. Do we have any comments or questions?
I had a quick question for staff.
Sure.
When we saw this last, did we put any conditions on it that you need to revisit with the addition of the small piece of land?
No, there were no conditions on the zoning.
Anyone have any questions or concerns?
How about a motion?
That was my next request.
I'm going to recommend approval of the rezoning request for approximately 0.18 acres from PCD district to CS district and forwarding it to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the finding of fact found in the body of the staff report.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second, Commissioner Carter. Is there any other discussion? All in favor? And opposed? Be 10-0. See, wasn't that much faster? Now we've taken things out of order. We've gone to, have item 6 next, which is the conditional use permit for the rugby complex. And Commissioner Kelly announced earlier that he would be abstaining from a couple of items on our list, and this being the first of those.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Catherine Weed, one of the planners, and I have the conditional use permit before you tonight. This is for the Westwick Rugby and Soccer Center. It's located on 1200 Road, also known as County Route 458. So the applicant's request with this conditional use permit is for improvements to the complex. It is an existing rugby and soccer complex, so they're proposing 3 phases of improvements. They have not requested any changes to the existing conditions on their CUP that they had in 1994. The part of their improvements are to install additional portable restroom facilities in phase 1 and 2, and then phase 3 would include a septic system, additional parking lot, locker rooms, viewing pavilions, and permanent restrooms. Just to give you a general idea of where this property is located, it is just south of Highway 10 on 1200 or Route 458, as you see there, as the star indicates, as you're heading east towards the lake. So the zoning in the area is actually split zoning on this particular piece of property. The zoning and surrounding it is also ag and valley channel. This one is split between those 2 zoning districts, and there is some rural agriculture in the area as well. So the reason that they need a CUP for this is that the use that they have there is under the umbrella of recreational facilities. Those are only permitted in the Valley Channel and Rural Agricultural District by a conditional use permit. I've turned this to orient it north. You can't really read the writing, but you can sort of see the layout of how things are oriented on the site. As I said, this is an existing site. Their proposed improvements, if I can get the mouse to work here. This is the existing parking area. It's currently unimproved gravel, I would say. They're proposing to bring that up to current gravel parking standards. There is this building here, which has some improvements planned. The fields are not changing. This area in the center would be part of the phase 3 area of construction, and then there would be an additional parking area with access, an additional access point off County Road 1200 here with another parking area as part of phase 3. That just gives you a general layout and orients you on the site. A brief history, as I said, they have, or they still have an existing CUP that they got in 1994 for the existing facility. In 1996, they came back to the commission, the county commission, for an extension for the installation for the septic system, which was granted. That deadline was for that septic to be installed in 1998. Throughout 2016, there was discussion between the applicant and planning staff regarding future improvements that they had planned for the site. And as they have moved forward now, they're ready to do some of those future improvements. So they have now, they trigger a new CUP because of the expansion of those facilities. So they are before you this evening for a recommendation on the CUP. Staff is actually recommending forwarding the CUP onto the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval. There are conditions that are listed. Those are all conditions that were on the original CUP from 1994. None of those have changed. They deal with operational hours, use of what types of events can be on the property, any lighting that would be on the site. One of the conditions of approval in 1994, again, was that septic system. That is not yet installed. They're proposing doing that in phase 3. I would also note that There wasn't a specific timeline in the application for when the phases would take place, so staff was not sure when Phase 1 would be complete, when Phase 2 would be complete, and when Phase 3 would be complete. Staff is actually making the recommendation that there would be a timeline put on the installation of that septic to be 1 year from, if approval is granted, from publication of the resolution for the CUP. And that would, that's how we're recommending that. But anyway, there's additional conditions. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
And is the applicant here?
they are. I believe they're here.
Okay.
Hello, my name is, nope, that's public. Rick Renfro. Man, these things take forever. 94, I can't believe that. That time went by fast. But we've been playing out there. The rugby club is, started with the university. Now there's a club side, a university side. We have a 19 and under squad. There's, I don't know, 100 people that are involved with it. We've been playing out there for probably 10 years. We get along with the neighbors great. It's been awesome. My wife won't come to any more games until we put in a septic system because she's tired of using the toilets, so we're all good about that. I don't know what this time frame will be, just like everything else. We want to do put in a concrete pad and put the toilets on that for a while, and then at some point in time, we want a place where the guys can take a shower and people can watch the games without being in the rain and the snow and all that kind of stuff. I think that's about all I should say, right? The less I say, the better, probably. And if you have any questions or anything, I'm here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And are there any members of the public who'd like to speak on this item? There were earlier, but we may have scared them off with the 2.5 hour. Well, I had asked for a show of hands earlier and we had some, but don't see anyone now. So with that, we will bring it back up to the commission for discussion.
I have a quick question for staff. Are there any issues with adding in a second access? Because this is county. I saw a lot of access points along that.
According to the county engineer, which we did ask, and I think I may have even noted it in the staff report, that he did not see an issue with adding that second access. They would, however, have to bring it up to county road standards and meet our design standards for that.
That's my only question.
Also about the access, was that their request to have the second access, or was that some other part of it in terms of traffic flow that the city was asking for it?
It was part of their request, but I think it actually would have even come up based on the comments that we got,
Okay.
that it would have been required.
I have a question for staff. This timeline for installing the septic system, is there any penalty or consequence for failure to install the septic system in terms of the staging of the project?
Well, I think the way we've worded the condition would be that they have, it's basically a dead drop timeline to get that installed, and then the CUP would cease to exist if it was not installed.
So yes, with the septic system, 20 years is a really long time to have forgotten to put it in. Is there any way that we can put as a condition, instead of that it's proposed to be installed with Phase 3, that be strictly with the deadline, with the 1-year deadline?
That's the way we intended it, so instead of it being with Phase 3, we're tying it to the CUP itself, and there's a timeline from the point of publication of the resolution, that 1 year from that date, regardless of what phase they're in,
Okay.
that is when.
Okay. And is that spelled out in here? Because condition D.
It's 1E.
1E, there we go. All righty. And Mr. Renfro, if you want to step up, I'll ask you. So I know with the phases you're looking at, that it makes the most sense to put in the septic system with the buildings that are going to be requiring it, but I think we'll probably be fairly serious about the time frame of that. How is that something that will be, that you can put your head around, like how that would happen? even if Phase 3 isn't really ready yet, to go ahead and get that septic system
Yes.
in?
Yes, I think there's a couple of options, just like everything else. One would be, we would go ahead and build a restroom now with the concrete pad and the septic system. And then once we got the money to do the other thing, would be on another side of the property. So at the end of the day, we'd actually have 2 restroom facilities. So you wouldn't have to walk and do all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Which would also mean 2 septic systems at the same time, or a lagoon, because of the showers and all that kind of stuff. So yes. Does that answer your question?
So if we move it outside of that phasing, if you're not ready for Phase 3, are you saying that that would then be a requirement to put in 2 septic systems, or is that the
No,
direction you're
no,
going
no, no, no.
anyway?
I think that if it's a requirement for us to have a septic system, and if we put in a septic system wherever it's at, then I would think we would fulfill that. And that we would have to decide whether or not we wanted to use that same one, or, hey, we're gonna build a $500,000 clubhouse over here, and now we've got money to do another septic system.
Okay.
Is that?
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anyone else have any questions or concerns? Comments? I know that area pretty well. I know some of the neighbors there. I think they do have a pretty positive relationship with the rugby complex. It's been there a long time.
Yeah, I would note, we have had no complaints or anything, and the county had no complaints about the existing complex at all, or the use of it. So-
Good. Is anyone interested in a motion? Commissioner Struckoff?
I move that we approve the conditional use permit for the rugby soccer complex with the conditions stated below.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Sands? Do we have any other discussion? All in favor? And opposed? We are 9-0 with 1 abstention. All right. Now we have item number 7, which is the special use permit for 1000 West 2nd Street.
Sandy Day. This item before you is a special use permit. It is for a public project. It is actually functioning as an institutional development plan as well. The property is zoned GPI. It's located in the Pinckney neighborhood. The project is actually, ultimately will include multiple phases. This particular request is related to the supportive housing aspect of what this total campus will be in the future. So there are 2 residential uses that are included. One is the group home, then the other is the multi-dwelling use that's associated with the project. Both of those uses require a special use permit in the GPI district. This is a slightly older version, is my understanding of what the campus plan would look like, where it shows the group home as well as the 10 apartment units, and then eventually the mental health facility that will be part of this project later. The property has some unique zoning that surrounds it. There is the Sandra Shaw Park located to the north, which happens to also be zoned GPI. We have IG on either side of the property, to the east and to the west. To the west is a mobile home park as well as Woody Park. And then the IG properties to the south and southeast are city properties, the water treatment facility. And in that center section here, this block between Alabama and Illinois Street is residential. What's highlighted in red here is a piece of land that ultimately will be replatted with this property, made into a single parcel. Would include a future vacation of the remaining portion of Alabama Street later with this project. Some of the land uses we've already talked about. As an institutional development plan, there is some specific parking associated with this project. The project does show excess parking, and normally that parking would be mitigated. This is a somewhat unusual project where we know we have future uses associated with it. It is efficient to construct the parking lot as proposed. And that excess parking will accommodate a known lack of parking in that area and ultimately help the neighborhood. These are some of the site design elements of the project. One of the issues with this project was how building setbacks are applied in the GPI district. It is a unique district, and it does not really intentionally contemplate in its setback requirements what a residential aspect would be. So the setback for that district is 40 feet when it is across from a residential zoning district. Through the site plan aspect of the project, the planning director has some authority to be able to reduce that setback to make it something more comparable to what the residential uses are to the south side of the project. There are couple of elevations that are included with the project showing the group home and the multifamily units where they are reflecting a very specific residential aspect to the neighborhood, tying it back into the residential portion of the neighborhood rather than to the industrial and institutional uses that are also in proximity. Staff's findings are summarized here, just the compatibility with the surrounding area. This particular portion of that project orients itself compatibility-wise to that central residential section of the neighborhood. We do not believe it will cause any negative impact to the neighborhood, that there will be some public improvements to the infrastructure, specifically some street, sidewalk, and storm sewer improvements. And then this plan will serve as the enforcement document to the project. There is floodplain that encumbers this property, but none of the improvements are located within the regulatory floodplain portion of that property. There is not a time limit associated with this particular special use permit. Staff's recommendation is for approval with one condition, and that is that a photometric plan be provided. We would normally have that at the time of the site plan. Fortunately, this project is still working through its final approvals, and lighting fixtures are not known at this time, so they are not able to provide the photometric plan. That is the reason it's reflected as a condition. I'm happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is here this evening as well.
Thank you, Sandy. The applicant like to speak?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Brian Kemp with Trainer HL. As usual, Sandy did a fabulous job on our report. We agree with her conclusion. We have members of the project team here as well, the architect and folks from the county. So if you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public who'd like to speak on this item? Go ahead, step on up.
Hello. I'm Bart Littlejohn, president of the Pinckney Neighborhood Association. I would first like to commend all the partners in this project for going ahead and letting us know ahead of time. We had them in for a meeting in February of this year, and Shannon Oury herself notified me earlier in late 2017. So all we would ask is we recognize that the vital need of this project for not only our neighborhood, but the community as a whole, and the benefits to the community, to our neighborhood in particular, are a dire need as well in terms of additional parking, which we've had discussion with the hospital about, and that has been ongoing, and I think this would do at least a little bit to alleviate that. And also, mainly I just want to say that we just want to make sure that we're part of the discussion, because some parts of the neighborhood are a little bit apprehensive about the speed of this project, given what was in the newspaper earlier this week. They want to make sure that it's not going too fast and that all parties are accounted for and that it's being as transparent as possible, quite frankly. So, but up until this point, it has been, and we really don't have anything negative to say about it at this point, and we just hope that that continues in the future.
Thank you. And tell me your name again. I missed it.
Bart Littlejohn.
Thank you. Any other members of the community?
I'm Joe Andrew. I live in the Pinckney neighborhood, and my concern with this project is more externalities of, these are people that will probably likely be walking through the neighborhood to get to downtown, since downtown is a draw, either through Bertram Park or through the streets. I live on one of the streets that would be sort of a direct route to downtown. And maybe I just got the feeling from the staff that they're just looking at the buildings, does that fit with the neighborhood? And I don't really care about that. I'm concerned with how does this institution being here with people living there that have, obviously there's a need for this facility, but it's sort of a NIMBY question. I just had my little girl here, and I don't want, I'm really concerned about the safety of it, essentially, and how that's going to affect my neighborhood, my safety, and even my housing prices. So I don't know if this is the time to bring those concerns up. I don't know if that's now or if that's in a future meeting, but that's my concerns at this point.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Got one more.
So I'm Shannon Lowry. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Authority. We're meeting with the Neighborhood Association again this coming January. Based on prior projects that I've been involved in, if people let us know that they want us to provide them notice of different things that are going on, we are happy to provide notice to various neighborhoods, and we fully intend to have all the neighborhoods involved. And certainly, we were just having conversations. We've agreed to meet with them individually or as a group. So we understand their concerns, and we fully intend to deal with it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, it may be helpful, turn the clock off, to have the two organizations landing on this site, just to explain programmatically what is happening here versus just the land use component. I think that might help the discussion.
Okay, and do you want that during the public comment portion
It's
of
up
the
to you,
meeting?
but we didn't present it, and this is a land use application, but it's also a use issue. And while a group home is given certain levels of protection in the state statutes, it's a special use in the GPI district. The state statute actually says that group homes where you have detached dwellings allowed, you have to accommodate a group home. It's a residential use, but GPI doesn't permit detached dwellings, so we went back into the code and created a special use permit for it. So I think there's a component of equity in terms of housing the citizens that will be housed here that we just need to kind of delve into. And if now's the time or after a full public comment, I think it'd be helpful.
I'd say if we can finish the public comment and then, because I don't think we want to run the clock while we're doing that. So, do we have any other members of the public? Okay, well then we can do it now. So can we get some background on the two facilities that are proposed for this site and the adjacent one?
Yes, I'm Matthew Falk. I'm the Housing Program Supervisor at Burt Nash, one of the primary designers of the programs that will be going on at Tier 2, which is the transitional house. To kind of give you an overview and kind of the things that we are planning to take place there. That will be staffed 24/7, so we will have mental health professionals there 24 hours a day, a minimum of 2 at night, And during the day, there will be multiple staff coming in and out of the building. There will be staff that will be there permanently as a part of the services that happen within the house itself. But each of the residents will be they'll be required to be actively engaged in mental health care, because this house is basically a clinical extension of the Burton Nash Community Mental Health Center. So each of the residents there will be also receiving a portfolio of other services that we offer, depending on whatever their needs are, including case management, therapy, medication services, what have you. So there will be case managers that work with each individual coming in and out of there. It will be operating as a home in the sense that they will have food there, they'll be cooking meals there, we will have things like meal groups and other group activities that happen there. But predominantly during the day, they would be working with their mental health providers, which includes, for example, going to the store or us providing transportation for them when they need to go places. That's not to say that people wouldn't have the freedom to exit the house and walk around. That is, our goal is to make it, because it's transitioning into permanent housing, our goal is to make this more of a residential setting and less of a clinical or institutional setting. So, the goal is to kind of represent that to some extent within that facility, while at the same time providing as much clinical care as we can to support those folks in their transition to permanent housing. There are curfews, and there will be rules about when you have to be there. There are definitely behavioral rules that are in place while for residents that are living there. Obviously, they have to get along with each other. They have to get along in the neighborhood. We operate a similar but smaller model at another facility that's located on the 1400 block of New Jersey Street, and we've operated that facility since 1998. So to give you kind of a comparison, that is a smaller model. The rules at this facility will be slightly different. Actually, they'll probably be a little more stringent than some of the rules that we have at that facility. But I think that neighborhood will give you a model in the sense of the history of that facility and how it has been able to operate within the community at that location. So for all intents and purposes, we will be providing, for security concerns, as much security as we can. There being a curfew, there will be a time, for example, we're not settled on that. At the other facility, I believe it's 8, depending on what the client's needs are, that they're in for the night, right? That they're not to leave, and they're not to leave before a certain time in the morning. And if they do, then there are consequences, ultimately that consequence being you're no longer a resident at this facility. So we have a lot of history with operating that facility over in New Jersey Street. We have a lot of lessons that we've learned from there that we are definitely applying to this location itself. But if you have very specific questions, please ask.
We may.
May I ask a question? Shall we?
I think we'll get to that in just a minute.
So the Housing Authority will be operating a permanent supportive housing, but this is independent living, so unlike the transitional house, it will not have a curfew. The individuals, by the time they get into this level of housing, they've demonstrated that they're sort of ready for a less restrictive type of housing. But we will have staff, and we also will work with Burton Nash staff so that they will have support services available to them right next door. You saw how close those units are. One of the big pieces of the project, of the total project we're working on, are peer support individuals who all the participants will have access to. So this type of housing we don't have very much of, and we have a great demand for. We run several housing programs, including voucher programs, and right now we have 20 plus individuals who would qualify for this type of program who are living in private housing all over town right now. And the partnership between Burt Nash and the Housing Authority works with these individuals to help them maintain stable housing. Housing Authority also runs a 6-unit permanent supportive housing, which will be run similar to what we're proposing in Tier 3 in this project. In that property, it's a 6-unit property. We do not have 24/7 staff in attendance, but we have staff there every day, similar to what we will do with this. One of the points of that staffing is that when you see somebody running into a problem, you can help them deal with whatever the problem is before they, reach a situation where they're having to access another institution. And so that's the whole point of this, this program. And quite frankly, these are our community members, and they live all over town right now, but without support. And in this project, they will be living with more supports that will enable them to live more stably.
Thank you. We normally allow the applicant then to respond to any of the public comment we heard, but we have kind of maybe several of you that are, would any of you like to respond to the comment that was heard either? Okay. Okay. So with that, we'll close the public comment session, but we will probably have questions for all of the above. And now I believe Commissioner Carter had a question.
So I think the presentation on the independent living began to address my question. I think the comment you made at the very end was very important, because one of my questions when it comes to interaction with the neighborhood is, what kind of care is this cohort, or are these cohorts of people receiving now, and where? I mean, the group home, I understand, is not meant to replace the New Jersey facility, but augment it. So the folks who will be getting care here, where are they now?
They are existing in a spectrum of places. Some of them are living independently in their own apartments, just wherever in the community. For example, some of them already have a housing voucher. They may even be on what's called a general Section 8 voucher, which doesn't require any supports. Some of them may be on a transitional voucher, which requires some case management in place. Some of them may be living at home with their families and may be an adolescent, right? So these are facilities that are going to exist a long time, and they're going to be there to support anyone in the community who ends up having some kind of crisis that includes housing as a major component of that, and that we identify housing as being a major component of exacerbating that issue in their life. So when you ask that question, you're asking who are mental health consumers and who are the different kinds of people that at various different times in their life need support. I would argue that that's every one of us, depending on who we are and who our background is. So, this is something that we as a community need to be addressing on a larger scale about the stigma about mental health and who's a mental health consumer or not. But in a real way, this is the type of consumer that will be using this house is anybody that you could possibly know, in that sense. That we don't know what precipitates a crisis in someone's life, and so we're looking at providing a much more comprehensive network of services that are there to provide a safety net for anyone who may experience that. So I've worked as a direct service provider up until the last 2 years now. I'm in a management position on the homeless outreach team. So I've had people who at one point in time were earning 6 figures a year, were 20-year professionals, and because of other events that precipitated in their life fell apart. They ended up on the streets with severe mental health issues, and they ended up coming through my door, and we were there to support them and get them back on their feet or get them into a stable living environment, and to the point in which that person no longer needs support anymore. So there's not a set group of people that need that kind of support. So that's the best way I can answer it, right? I mean, this is not, no one's immune, and this is not a subset of society. This is something that anyone and everyone could experience, and that may need that support. That's the most honest answer I can give you.
Commissioner Sands.
I have a question, probably for the applicant slash staff. The dotted outline on future expansion, is that gonna be an expansion primarily of the Tier 1, the crisis center, or is that intended to be more of a Tier 2 expansion?
Jill Jolliker, I'm with the, with the county, Douglas County, and our hope is that that will be the crisis center.
Okay, so more of a Tier 1 expansion?
Correct.
Okay.
And kind of piggybacking on what Matthew said about who we're serving here, the transitional housing is scoped in a way that it provides the flexibility so that if someone needs to be there for 5 to 6 to 8 days, they can do that. But if they need to be there for 6 months, they can do that there, depending on their situation. That gives that flexibility that we're not certain we'll need to have at a crisis center. But it builds in that short-term stay.
I did have a follow-up question, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
So the area to the east of the Tier 3 apartments, there's a lot of open space there. Is there an intent that may someday become more of either Tier 3 or Tier 2 expansion?
No, I'll let Shannon.
Yeah, it's the floodplain, and there's a big hill
Yeah.
there.
Oh, there's a big hill, okay.
Like, I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, I saw the elevation, but I couldn't tell if that was gonna be filled to raise or if that was cut.
I mean, anything's possible in the future, but current plans don't
And
employ anything like that.
I think we also don't want to, we want to be mindful of the neighborhood.
Sure.
And we don't have any plans to expand any of the housing in this neighborhood. You know, the best plan is to have it more distributed throughout the community.
So what can be done? Landscaping, anything can be done in that floodplain, or is everything totally restricted?
It is, well, you can develop in the floodplain with certain limitations and restrictions, but the more you develop, the more standards you have to meet. Part of what this project includes are some public improvement plans, and so one of the things the applicant is looking at is using some of that area for detention, for stormwater mitigation, perhaps rain gardens, some of those kinds of elements into that area. At one point, I think there had even been floated an idea of maybe a ball field or something, some sort of outdoor area. So at this point, I would say if the applicant wanted to come in and expand housing, we would be revisiting the institutional development plan aspect of this project.
Okay.
I just have a comment.
Go ahead.
I think this is needed in our community. I'm looking forward to people being able to be, or to reside there. I think having mental health staff on site is a significant and huge benefit, and I am excited to vote in favor of this, and I think it's needed. So I thank you guys. And Matthew, I've worked with you before, and you do a great job.
Can I ask a question, and any number of you, whoever feels would like to answer it, about how people access the site? And it's probably different between the group home and independent living, because you talked about that you'd be providing transportation. So, I mean, who's going to be driving here, parking here versus walking? What kind of access?
Ask for some clarification, you meaning physical access or programmatic access?
Oh,
Or
physical
both?
access, yeah, people coming and going.
Okay.
Will they be driving in? I mean, if people are living in the facilities?
The actual, so, no one owns a vehicle at our Bridges house now, and it's very rare that anyone in the population that we serve, it's not uncommon, I mean, absolutely uncommon, but it's rare that someone would have a vehicle. So the vehicles coming and going will predominantly be staff.
Okay.
And we will be providing the residents their transport, including, hey, you gotta go to the store, taking you to the store. That's one of the main services that case management provides, depending on someone's particular need.
Mhm.
So Staff will be the ones using vehicles, and staff will be the ones providing most of the transportation that is needed for the clients who live there.
What about pedestrian, transportation for the people who live there? Is that expected that they, because there's a multi-use path that's pretty close to there that gets to downtown and that sort of thing? Because we had some questions about from the neighborhood about pedestrian access.
Sure. So during the day, if someone needs to get out and walk around, they will be allowed to do that. So, and part of our site plan includes putting a sidewalk in on that side of the street, from the one boundary line of the property to the other boundary line of the property. There is nothing there at this point in time. So, part of a good wellness plan is some activity too. So we will also encourage people to be getting out and walking around and engaging in some kind of physical activity. For example, even now we have walking groups that utilize the Sandbridge Hall walking path as a group. In the sense of where they're walking and where they're going, they're citizens. That's public space. As long as they're not breaking our rules and or behaving appropriately in public during those times in which they're not required to be there, or they're not meeting with the service provider, they will be able to walk around in public.
Yeah, and that was my question, that when you said you're providing transportation, that's as a service as needed and not as a requirement, like, no, you must go with us, kind of thing.
Yes, no.
Okay.
No, in the time that we're meeting with them, they will be meeting with us, but there will be times in which they're not. I would say that the services that are involved in, for example, the Bridges House now are pretty intensive. And so that downtime is not, it's the minority of time, not the majority of time. But there are times in which clients, they're not meeting with someone, so they do go out and walk around and are free to be out in the neighborhood in public space.
Thank you. I would reiterate Commissioner Butler's comments about, we're very excited to have a facility like this to be able to offer to the community. And this is one of the steps along the way. Have any other comments, questions?
Just a comment. One of the hats I wear is I represent people facing involuntary commitment in Wyandotte County. So I'm kind of familiar with everything you're talking about and the intense need, and it's really gratifying to see the continuum of services all in one spot, going where you can graduate between different facilities. And I sincerely hope that we get the crisis center in there, because that's a very needed piece of this. So I'm all in favor of this. And as you pointed out, these are individuals that live all throughout our community. They live in Section 8 housing in neighborhoods, and you don't even know the individuals are there. Individuals can cause problems, but there are always ways for homeowners to deal with that. And I'm sure Bert Nash, and you're going to be open to hearing anything that's going on, and you'll address those issues, because I know that's part of what you're doing to help people reintegrate into the community. So I'm all in favor of this, and really look forward to seeing it get up and running.
And I love the proximity to so much green space. I think that's a definite benefit for
It's a nice trail back in
it is,
Sanders
and
Hall.
good connectivity.
Go ahead, Liz.
Go ahead.
I just think it's worthwhile at least acknowledging the gentleman that came in and raised concerns about safety. I think, though, that we, as we consider these things, think of this thing as these sorts of issues as being sort of more of a community-wide issue. And so I would hope you, sir, as you sit here and hear that, can understand sort of the balancing that we have to do as we go through this process. But I appreciate you coming and talking about that issue.
And I'm very glad to hear express that there's been great transparency with the project and that will continue to move forward and continue to engage the community and the neighborhood for any particular concerns they may have as we move forward.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of a special use permit located at 1000 West 2nd Street and forward the request to the City Commission with the recommendation of approval, subject to the condition 1 listed in the body of the staff report.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Sinclair got there first. As far as additional discussion, I do think it was worth mentioning about the waivers from the setbacks and the buffer yards, that in order to, usually residential doesn't happen in an institute, what's our zoning? GPI setting, but, and that's why it's a little bit different from what the usual requirements are, but I'm very much in favor of making it absolutely as residential and as seamless in the neighborhood as possible, and I approve of both waivers. I don't know that that is something that we don't seem to have that as a requirement in our recommendation, but I'm very much in favor of both of those.
Thank you. It's a little bit odd in the code, but we basically do it, from my position, we grant an administrative waiver of the site plan, but we typically bring it forward as confirmation, affirmation of it, because the site plan is not complete until the special use permit is approved. So throughout the planning commission, city commission process, we make sure to present that to you, that we're starting from a point of an administrative waiver versus a board of zoning variance or a planning commission variance, which you don't really have the authority to do. So we have to get there some way, and that's the vehicle we use to do that.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on this item? All in favor? And opposed? We have 9-0 with 1 abstention. And by my counting, that brings us from item 7 to item 4. Which is the text amendment for conditional zoning, and I figured that would clear the room. And the return of Commissioner Kelly.
There's speakers in there.
Mr. Carpenter, have a stay?
I'm sorry?
Mr. Carpenter, have a stay?
I might abstain.
Once again, this evening, Sandy Day. Earlier this afternoon, Scott talked with the planners about keeping our presentations short. So I went back and tried to do more editing to this particular one. We have talked a lot about this topic. We are amending specifically text in Articles 20-1301 and 20-1303. 1301 is the general provisions, and 1303 is specific to zoning. The couple of criteria that are in the staff report dealing with text amendments. Sorry.
We don't want anyone to miss what you have to say.
Okay. That need for the language has really grown out of those many discussions that we have had about different and specific zoning applications in the past, which is where this has evolved from. And really the intent is to protect and preserve that neighborhood character in which these projects occur. We started with defining what conditional zoning is, so if you have questions about this language or propose alternative language, that would be one of the discussion items that we have. This is the language the staff has proposed and is inserted into those particular appropriate places. A couple other changes that you would note is that we have revised some of the formatting of those two sections just to make them a little bit more readable, dividing up some of the paragraphs, as well as adding some specific language. So this slide really is giving you an example of where we made that change from the long paragraph into the subsections, just to be able to pinpoint those particular things. In Article, or Section 20-1303, we really have amended just 3 sections of this portion of the code. The portion in Article E, F is completely new, in that put some domino effect in changing the numbering within the project. And then Article 20-1303H really gets into those findings of fact. So what is that criteria by which we are judging these kinds of zoning? This is that language that is in the code. I'm not going to read it to you unless you ask me to. This is setting out when we are considering those things, when that particular application with conditions relates to a situation that's created or aggravated by that proposed development. Some of the specific conditions that you can look at, and really making that distinction that you can't grant basically use variances within this. You can't upzone, you never could. We've never recommended that to you in terms of residential density. It's always been lower. Restricting density and intensity of those projects. And then H, where we added basically an additional finding of fact. This would only appear in your staff reports when we have those projects with conditional zoning. Otherwise, this would not be a finding of fact that would be included. And it's really getting at the reasonableness of what this request is. Happy to try and answer any other specific questions. Our recommendation, of course, is to forward this with approval.
All right, thank you, Sandy.
Sure.
And we have no applicant on this because we asked for it. Would any member of the public like to speak about conditional zoning? I didn't think so. So we'll bring that back up to the commission for discussion. And everyone's going to look at Commissioner Carpenter.
Look at you. Well, thank you. I think the proposed text amendment has addressed all the issues that I've raised over the years. I'm specifically happy that we have a definition and we have a set of procedures. And the only thing is, we have the conclusion, you have the proposed definition, and below it's a conclusion which says the application of conditional zoning should be used judiciously when all other options have been exhausted. The only suggestion I would make is we put something in the actual definition that says that this is the attachment of special conditions or restrictions to a rezoning when all other options have been exhausted, possibly. Just to add that to the definition, to stress what your conclusions are, because those conclusions are going to get lost in time unless somebody goes back to read this specific staff report. But the fact that it's always, when I reviewed all the 36 applications, it does divide this up into those areas that I kind of identified, and the one that was most problematic to me was when an application comes in to go from a lower use zoning use to a higher use and then strike out everything except the one thing you want. And it seems that we've eliminated that, and that is, I think, the big point, and it keeps all those other useful applications of conditional zoning in here, and we have a specific process to follow and findings to make. And so I really appreciate all the time that Sandy you put into that, and whoever else has been involved in that backroom discussions on addressing this issue. I'm very satisfied with it.
Any other comments?
Make the motion, Jim.
Well, gosh, come on, everybody talk.
My only question would be, do you want to make that an actual amendment?
I would like just to add to the definition that we put just that statement from the conclusion that this is to be used when all other options have been exhausted. And those options are, we're aware of those. They're different zoning requests, a text amendment to the comp plan, those types of things, but we should look at that. And you know, the most recent one of those is when we split up many warehouses and had a text amendment to address that. There might be times when that is more appropriate than a conditional zoning. So I think that this is now addressed in here. So I would make the motion to that we forward the proposed amendment, TA 18-00430, amending Article 13 of the Lawrence Land Development Code of the City Commission, to the City Commission with a recommendation to approve with the one amendment to the definition of conditional zoning, that the first sentence say the attachment of special conditions or restrictions to a rezoning when all other options have been exhausted. And that would be the only change to what's proposed.
I'd like to second it. Do we have any other discussion on this? You
Madam
do.
Chair, may
Go
I?
ahead.
And I don't mean to complicate things, but I'm thinking about whether or not the word reasonable should be inserted there. Reasonable alternatives or options, because.
Reasonable is most reasonable to add to that.
Thank you. Because there's always an option, whether it's
Yes.
reasonable or not is a different story.
Exactly, right.
Thank you.
So is staff comfortable with the amendment that we?
I think it gives the
Commissioner Carpenter-
commission's guidance, yeah.
Okay. And I hope this gives enough guidance to the city commission that asked for us to discuss this. I feel like it's an important tool. I didn't want to do without it, but this does give us some context for when it's appropriate and when other times when we need to keep looking for a different solution. So, you have any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? And we are 10-0. And have a happy Sandy. Which brings us to our final item, which is item number 5, which Commissioner Kelly, let me ask if you. Okay.
Bitter end.
All right.
If you abstained, you get to leave early, is that how this works?
He said he's not, so.
I've got my plan.
Because you show up. It's your part as being present.
Exactly.
Okay, Catherine Week before you again, and ironically enough, I have conditional zoning to present to you tonight. So this is for a district that is currently zoned IBP. The applicant is proposing that the rezoning be to IL, which is limited industrial, with conditions. This project is located at 1900 Wakarusa Drive. And here's the general location for this property, the layout here. It's in the southern portion of an industrial business park district that I will show you in a moment. So this is the Oriad West Research Park. You can see from the star that it is located at the south eastern corner of that research park development area, and it is just north of GPI, which is institutional zoning. This will give you an overview of the zoning in the area. This, if you can see this light colored area, is the parcel in question. And it is in the southern portion of all of this industrial IBP, PID, IL, GPI. So. Again, this is showing you just the character of what is developed in this neighborhood for this and overlaying the zoning districts for that development on top of that. So you can see this is the city-owned property GPI here. There is some residential to the west and to the east. And then the majority of it is that IBP to the north in a business park there. So I'm showing you this map because we do track our industrial areas. And we have limited industrial areas, so we like to keep that those areas operating as industrial areas. This one is the westernmost one here, if you can see. What they're proposing in this rezoning is it is a lesser district, the IL district. They're proposing to keep the uses that are in the IBP district and IL district. So those uses that are the same, that would overlap, they would keep, and then add 2 uses that would accommodate their development project, which would be kennel and sales and grooming, which is under the animal services division or use categories. Those are typically not permitted in the IL, or in the IBP district, sorry, but they are permitted in the IL district. Uses that would not be permitted with this rezoning would be those uses lost going from the IBP to the IL that are not the same, that don't overlap. Those 4 uses are like a cultural center, extended care facilities, which would be granted by use of an SUP, accessory restaurants, which are only accessory, and then private dining establishments. That is really not common in this area anyway, so that may or may not be a loss for you to consider for those. And then again, those uses that would be restricted would be any use in the IL district not already in the IBP district, that common use. And then that full list is found in the staff report. And then those 2 uses that they would add would be the kennel and sales and grooming. So again, other factors that we consider when we're looking at rezoning in general, and especially rezoning with conditions, is the extent to which the removal restrictions will detrimentally affect the nearby properties. In this case, they are maintaining all of those IBP uses that are currently on the parcels. They would not be using those. And then the length of time that the subject property has been vacant as zoned. This property has been vacant since it was annexed in 1983. So this provides an opportunity for the property to develop in a manner that is in keeping with the character of the business park and the current development of the neighborhood. And then comparison effects of denial. Again, the property would remain vacant if this rezoning is not granted. Their business plan would not fit here, so this particular parcel would not be accommodated by development. Staff is actually recommending approval of the rezoning request for the approximate 2.7 acres from IBP to IL with conditions, and forwarding it to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the finding of facts in the body of the staff report. And I would be happy to answer any questions specific to the project.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And is the applicant here?
Yes.
And I so...
No, this has just been so much fun all night long.
You didn't bring coffee for the rest of us.
Didn't have enough hands.
Would the applicant like to come and address the commission, please?
Consider it a learning experience. Introduction to planning.
That if someone asks you to serve on the planning commission, you know what to say.
I had a short presentation, which at this point feels like it might still be too long. Let's see. Just tried to introduce you to who we are a little bit and why we asked. How do I do the slideshow? And why we're asking for this. So this is just our getting ahead a little bit. There's sort of preliminary site plan, which obviously is the next step, but just so you can kind of see what we're wanting to do with it a little bit. We're calling it the Pet Campus because it's space bar. It's a concept I've been designing for about 4 years now, since we decided that I needed to expand my business because it's bursting at the seams. But I've always been heavily involved in nonprofit work. And we have a pretty unique skill set in the work that we do in the play groups and with dogs. And I wanted to do something that I felt like could contribute a little more to the community with that unique skill set and set us up to succeed a little further into our mission. As you can see, Home Sweet Home and Poshwash are the for-profit entities. Lawrence Humane Society is one of the nonprofits, and then the other one, which I'll describe a little more later, is the Symbiotic Behavioral Treatment Center. Just for some context, Home Sweet Home's I've been in business for 14 years. We just had our anniversary on the 4th. Poshwash is about 13 years. Humane Society, obviously, like 65 years. And the Symbiotic Behavioral Treatment Center, we've been going on between 5 and 6 years. So there's some experience with these entities trying to get together. But the biggest thing that I'm excited about really is this pairing of for-profit and nonprofit together in the mission. And really what it is to take advantage of synergy, just of unique needs, unique skill sets, and the unique sort of demands that we need from facilities, from space, stuff like that, to be able to do more, do better and do more for more dogs and pets and people and all that. We believe in what we do. I know that like I said, I've been involved in this community and other communities for a long time with my skills sets. I've served on the board for Lawrence Humane Society for about 6 years, rising up through to be the co-chair for a while. And I have other sort of community initiatives that I'll skip over, but Amber, of course, is involved also in the community quite a bit. And that's why I feel like it's a good pairing to get two of us who run businesses who kind of care about the impact we have on the people and animals in our community, and also as business owners and entrepreneurs kind of on the city generally, its development, its economic success, and things like that. I hate going off notes, I apologize. But I think the other big thing that's important for us with this is to mindfully maximize how we can integrate into the community. How many different ways can we have an impact, from sharing our skills and helping more dogs and providing more services to more people, all the way through to education and classes, providing internships. Just how many different ways can we leverage this concept to get involved at the various aspects of our community. And the kind of where this comes from too is the whole concept of how we take care of pets and take care of homeless pets, owned pets. Everything has evolved a lot over the last 10 years, especially the last 5 years. It allows us all to kind of keep ahead, stay in the best practices, and apply those things. I was tacitly attached to a development in Kansas City of a program called Families Better Together with one of the nonprofits there, which basically focuses on keeping animals out of shelters, period. So just little things like that that we can do that take some of our learning experiences from around and just kind of apply them in this way. And just as so through service and supporting service, so what can we do and how can we help other people that are doing with this, which is just kind of the philosophy of pairing the for-profit and nonprofit entities. It allows us to expand needed services into the west side of town. I've been bursting at the seams. I turn down more clients than I can keep every holiday and often throughout the summer, and I have been for years. It also allows us to expand the reach of the Lawrence Humane Society, which I'll get into that in a little bit. Improves quality of life and physical and mental health. But again, the big thing is to strengthen the bond between the business community, the community, and the nonprofit community. Quickly, for Home Sweet Home, it'd be a bigger, newer, cleaner, quieter facility. It gives us a geographic accessibility for more dogs. And allows us to address, like I said, kind of our overflow and the amount of people that we turn down at our peak times. Specifically, we have what I call an inclusive model. Early in this business model, people were kind of going with the exclusive thing, that it was fancy and something, you know, hoity-toity or whatever for dogs. And I went opposite of that within the first year of doing it, which is where Where Dogs Come to Be Dogs slogan came from. So it was just, how can I price this to make it accessible to as many people as possible, and how can I use our skill sets to make it as accessible to as many dogs as possible, so we don't need only the rich guy's perfectly behaved poodle, you know, which in my opinion isn't, I mean, no offense to rich guys with poodles, but just saying. And I have about 15 employees right now in a facility that's half this size. So, you know, reasonably speaking, when they both hit peak flow, you know, we'd be looking at 20 to 30 more jobs just for me out of this facility. And it allows us to play an even greater role for the Humane Society than we already do, than we already give them help with some of their dogs right now. Do you want to speak to yours?
Yep, I'll take it. Hi, I'm Amber Nicole Poshwash. And what we get excited about when we think about this partnership and relocating to this new facility is that
Amber, do you mind?
Microphone?
Closer to the mic, thank you.
Is when we opened 13 years ago, we were planning to just be a self-serve pet wash and retail. And over that time, we have developed that we are mainly a full-service dog grooming salon. and we offer full-service baths. People like to come wash their dog like one time, and then they want us to do it. So anyways, what we would be so excited about is to be able to design the space around what we're actually doing. And for instance, special areas for cats, because right now when we offer cat services, we do it before we open in the morning so that there's no dogs. But we also we're going to pull back from the retail a little bit because, online shopping. Retail has been slowly decreasing for us anyways. And we want to provide space for the community to have educational classes or even doggy birthday parties, or, we just know that we need space. We need space for us to have our employee meetings. And our slogan is making Lawrence the best place to live with a pet. So that reflects our involvement with the community overall and our support of nonprofits and other community events. But, sorry, I've sat here all night long and I was like, now I don't have nerves, and now I'm up here and get nervous. We also have trained several groomers over the years, mostly young women that'll start off as bathers, and then we do a very long, almost year-long process of training groomers. So we want to make that an official school setting, and we would be the only place between Lawrence or Denver that would be doing that. So I think that's really, or excuse me, St. Louis or Denver, that would be an excellent opportunity for our community as well. And we really focus on setting the standards for the grooming industry. And I can anticipate that legislation will even be coming eventually around that, around pet care that doesn't exist yet, and we want to be on the front end of that. And I'm sorry. I'm going to take a deep breath. So we're just looking to grow our services, and currently we already are collecting about $5,500 a month in sales tax. So and we tax our services because it's a property. So the more we offer, the more we support our community. So there you go.
I was saying, I know we're needing to move quick here. Oh, I don't know how to move backwards. I ruined it.
Arrows,
Here we go.
page down. Page down.
So, it seems like a small space. Oh, I figured. Oh, the numbers. Good deal. Okay. So it seems like a small space, but really the cutting edge of sheltering is to think of it more as a business and less as a charity. And so then the same kind of things come in to how does the Lawrence Humane Society have a bigger impact? Well, it needs to consider the same things like location, market penetration, demographic access. Just through their research, they can tell the West zip codes are really underrepresented in their statistics. Like, they just don't get the same kind of traffic and adoption and stuff from 4.7 and 4.9 as they do from 4.6 and 4.4. So it really gives them access to a whole other market of people who may consider adopting a dog through them, as opposed to either driving to Topeka, which I know a lot of people on the west side do, or whatever. It's just that east-west thing in Lawrence. But just the numbers based on the size of the community, the space, and the amount of animals that they take in right now, be looking at 500 or more extra animals that could be adopted out into the community and helped and stuff, just through having this extra reach. And then just a quick anecdote, just giving us access to those animals easier, when they have large state busts or something. Amber and Poshwash helps with grooming and cleaning up the dogs, which is a part of their physical and mental recovery from that. And I had a call just last week where they wanted help evaluating one of the dogs, and there's nothing I can tell you in a 20-minute snapshot that you don't already know about that dog. But if you just want to take him to the west side, we'll start working him into the groups, and we'll spend the next few weeks getting to know him. We'll let you know. So it just gives us more access. That's part of that kind of working together stuff, to be able to help more. And that basically what that does is let them raise the bar of dogs that they can save. So a dog that may have been too challenging, or consider we don't have the resources or the time to work with this dog and we can't help him, it raises that. It raises the sort of threshold of failure, I guess. Symbiotic Behavioral Treatment Center could be its own 5-hour meeting. But in a nutshell, it would be the first of its kind in the country. it evolves the idea of the human and canine bond that exists within the animal-assisted therapy model into turning us into teams again. So it takes groups of dogs that need therapy, that need rehabilitation, and it pairs them with groups of people. And it uses evidence-based methods, walks them through the same individual training and individual therapy, group work. It just creates parallel and converging paths for people and dogs in healing. This is something I founded about almost 6 years ago. It's been in development. This would be a phase 2 of this project, but it's also kind of the capstone of bringing the human-canine bond together, pushing it forward. And this would be providing actually professional level jobs as well as entry-level jobs, and would set us up to do some research and some concept testing that would, I mean, this doesn't exist anywhere else right now. So this is kind of my dream. This is what I hope this campus gives me access to, is to bring this to the community, and let us start, integrating in that level. We always try and be good neighbors. Like I said, I've been on the east side for 14 years. We've reached out to the neighbors around. I've had a couple discussions with people. We had an open house at Jefferson's. We've handed out informational flyers in addition to the letters we were asked to hand out. And then just to touch on what was in the report, it's been an undeveloped lot, and it seems to go along with or at least not contradict the Horizon 2020. And the development is sort of an extension of what's already there. It would put an animal facility next to a veterinarian, and then it would put a mental health facility right next to, and rehabilitation facility right next to a doctor's office. So it's just kind of an extension of what's already there development-wise. And then the sort of things I know some of you guys like to see, it is infill. Obviously, the development would be an increase in property tax revenue for the city over the agricultural taxes you guys are getting in front of it right now. It is an expansion of local homegrown businesses, the jobs created, like I said, and then it fits within your Horizon 2020. And just to point out, like she said, it's not an overly broad change. So we're not trying to get, manure central or whatever. I don't know what people don't want to have in that neighborhood, but not trying to get that. And there has been some changes near it to what we're asking for. So I think that's it. Cool. Got through it quick.
Thank you. Can you tell me your name? I'm not sure you mentioned it.
My goodness, I was in a hurry. Anthony Barnett.
Okay.
Sorry. Do I need to write it on this sheet?
No, I don't think so. Thank you. Do we have any members of the public that would like to speak on this item?
I was going to mention too, and I forgot to earlier, we didn't get any communications prior to getting it into the packet, but in the last 24 hours, we did have 6 letters that came in that'll go on if it gets recommended to City Commission, and they were all in favor of the project, so we didn't have any negative comments.
That's good to know. Thank you. So we'll bring it up to the commission for our discussion, and we may have questions for you, but you're welcome to sit down until we do.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
For staff. I'm assuming that we didn't do any analysis, or at least in the staff report, no analysis was done as far as whether this conditional zoning fits within the new standards that we just voted on 20 minutes ago.
We did not do the analysis.
Okay. So
But
just.
we did carefully position it on the agenda.
No, I'm tracking that. I'm tracking that. I got you. When I give it a cursory look, though, looking at because I think it's going to be important, specifically for the city commission, who's going to see, who knows what order they're going to see these in. I want to go on record as looking through what we just approved for conditional zoning and attempting to apply that standard to this project. So conditional zoning, I'm on page 364 with the revised language. Conditional zoning may be considered when a clear and specific goal, policy, or recommendation of an approved area, neighborhood nodal plan, or comp plan is identified, or when a clear harm or aggravation of a negative externality to the surrounding area can be mitigated by a condition. So I think this project this request for conditional zoning applies to the first part of that definition and not the second part. Types of conditions, restrict or prohibit uses permitted by right, I'm sorry, the reasonableness of conditions as determined by the following criteria. Conditions shall facilitate a clear and specific goal, policy, or recommendation of an improved area. Conditions may be applied when a clear harm, okay, that repeats the other two. The lesser change table cannot be employed to achieve the same result as a proposed conditional zoning. I'd like to look at that. And then conditions may not allow an increase in intensity when otherwise restricted by the base district. I think this is a decrease in intensity for the base district. So I'm going to take a look at the lesser change table while someone else talks.
Well, for my part, I first want to say thank you very much for your patience in having you last on such a long night. We did position it after we did our text amendment so that we had some of that conversation behind it. I think that will help at the city also. And I love to see a local business get a chance to grow. And I think that's where the strength of our community is to have local businesses that we are able to foster and then allow them to move to that next level. So I'll give you enough time to look up what you're looking for, or who else would like to have a comment or a question?
I guess I have a question or a couple of questions for staff. So this is just a few blocks south of the Wakarusa Veterinary Hospital.
It's actually right next.
Not even.
It's right
Maybe
next
it's
door.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so my question, and I know they provide kennel, boarding services. And I'm curious about what it is about these specific uses that are not permitted that require a zoning change.
So the kennel use as part of the veterinary clinic is accessory to that, and that is permitted in the IBP, the accessory element. The use on its own is not permitted in IBP. That's where the IL comes in. So to accommodate that kennel use, the IBP would not fit. Also, sales and grooming is under the animal services category as well. And because they're combining the joint businesses, that would cover both under their programmatic, and that is not an IBP, it's in the IL, so.
Okay. Then I guess my follow-up question is the primary location of Home Sweet Home, and I don't know exactly about Posh Wash, but what's the zoning there? Is it IL, or, I mean, what's the?
I believe it is IL, I'd have to look it up, I don't have GIS open.
Posh Wash is CN2.
It's the 15th and it's Bob Billings and Walk, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure
It's
about
commercial,
Home
no.
Sweet Home.
I think Home Sweet Home is IL, I don't know. Do you have that?
Out there on Haskell, right?
I can go pull it up on the map.
Because I think the primary question isn't about the virtue of the facility itself, but just the mechanisms by which, we're being asked to approve a recommendation or forward a recommendation for a particular change in status. And I'm curious, I'd actually like to hear from Commissioner Carpenter too about, about this particular approach versus other alternatives.
So if you're not ready,
Okay.
Commissioner Carpenter, I did find the lesser change table. Going from IVP to IL is not a lesser change. So I think if I go back to the proposed text article, I think this, and again, I'm saying this for public record purposes for the benefit of the city commission. Because it's not a lesser change, it fulfills 3 of the 4, and the only one that doesn't fulfill is, well, let's see, he did, whether or not it was directed by staff, the property owner enhanced the written notice requirements, held public meetings. Restrict or prohibit uses permitted by right or allowed by a special use permit in a base district. We're not restricting or prohibiting uses, we're adding 2, right? So there's 2 down. Limit or restrict density when permitted by right. We're not really worried about the density on this project. It's not residential, so it's not a density issue.
I would clarify something about the lesser table. If you look at the lesser table, it says IL, lesser would be IBP, and then CN2. And CN2, it would also not permit the kennel use, so that wouldn't have been an alternative for them.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that's,
I wasn't even looking at the CO2
Okay.
part, I was just looking at the IL. Restricting intensity of development to include but not limited to Article 6 density and dimensional standards and Article 5 use related. I'm not even sure what that means.
the dimensional standards relate to the setbacks and buffer
Okay,
yards.
all right, so
and-
then that won't
yeah.
be a concern. So again, for public record purposes, I believe that this project, under new conditional zoning standards, would apply.
Thank you, Commissioner Sands.
Forgive me for putting you on the spot.
I mean, this application came in under the old rules, so what we just voted on doesn't matter.
It doesn't, and I agree,
But, you know, in any event, this is one of those categories that's been used that, where you go to a lesser density zoning category and strike uses that obviously don't fit in with the area, and that's what they're doing here.
Yeah.
So, you know, under the rules we had up until we've
40
recommended
minutes
a
ago.
change, and they're not actually changed yet, but under the existing rules, this meets those conditions. It's not one of those that, you know, sends up red flags in my head about how this has been done. It does appear to be a reasonable application of conditional zoning, and vote in favor of it.
Anyone else? Any motions?
I'll move to recommend rezoning approximately 2.7 acres from IBP Industrial Business Park District to IL Limited Industrial District located at 1900 Wakarusa Drive, and forward it to the City Commission with recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact found in the body of the staff report. Subject to the following condition, that the permitted uses are limited to those that are listed A through WW.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Carter? Any other discussion?
Other than they actually needing some of your services sometimes, no.
Yeah, I didn't want to go on record by saying, I think this is a very good idea. I think it's a very good use for the land out there. It's been vacant for a long time. You know, I'm excited to see what happens with this.
Me too. All in favor? And opposed? We are 9-0 with one abstention. Thank you.
Thank you. Worth the wait.
You still gotta go to the city.
And do we have any other business?
We might bring Commissioner Kelly back in.
I think he's working on it.
Only full of cookies.
Yeah, there'll be no more cookies left now.
Because I did have just a couple of things, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I think after Monday's meeting, we'll be speaking with the chair and vice chair about, you know, the schedule of that comp plan review and whether or not we need to tweak anything. We'll bring information back to you at the appropriate time, I think, unless you have anything else to say to that.
Well, Jeff and I had a conversation about that before this meeting and thought that perhaps it'd be appropriate to look over some options for how we move forward at our mid-month meeting
Okay,
on the 9th.
very good. Great. And then I just, from staff's perspective, want to also show our appreciation and gratitude to Commissioner Kelly. When I think back at all of the valuable input and not only in these meetings, but I think especially of our orientations throughout the years and how deep we go to make this process, which looks like a lot of sausage making, right? How it actually turns out very well. And so I thank you, and staff thanks you. Appreciate it.
Well, just if I can say one, just deal with me for a second, sorry. But just how much I've enjoyed being on the Planning Commission and working with all of you and working with staff, and what an amazing staff. They work so hard. And I heard one thing, I think it was a conference we were at that's always stuck with me about planning commission, and I'll say it one more time, is that I think it is the ultimate bit of democracy. You have two neighbors who stand on either side of the fence and let another neighbor help decide what we should do. And that's just such an amazing responsibility you have. And I've just really, really enjoyed this, and I look forward to reading your minutes. And
You're gonna watch the video.
I will watch hours of video, I'm sure. But I know we have really great people here, and I look forward to working with you in the future and seeing you at the retreat for sure. So,
You will be missed.
thank you, thank you. And I was really excited that my last vote was for conditional zoning. I thought that was really
Glad we could
awesome.
help you with that.
My first meeting, I didn't know what right-of-way was, so yeah, that's a good, good transition.
Are we done?
You're done.
Thank you, everyone. Another late meeting, but just wait till January.